Good morning. If members of the committee could take their seats now, please. We do have quorum, so... Good morning everyone. Bonjour mesdames et messieurs. Bienvenue aux réunions de la Comité sur l'environnement et de la protection climatique du 19 juin 2018. Welcome to the meeting of Environment and Climate Protection Committee for 19th of June 2018. We have quorum. I would like to go through the consent agenda first, and I'm going to propose a few changes to it. For starters, do we have any declarations of interest? Seeing none. Confirmation of minutes for Tuesday the 15th of May 2018. Those received? Carried? Thank you. Item 1, Energy Evolution, Ottawa's Community Energy Transition Strategy, Phase 2 update. We do have a presentation on that, as well as delegations, so we will hold that one. Item 2, 2017 Drinking Water Quality Management System Annual Management Review Report. We received perfect marks again. Does anyone wish to ask questions on that or to hold it?
Quick question.
Okay, a quick. Oh, we've got questions. All right, I better hold that one. Okay, thank you. Item 3, financial statements for in-house solid waste collection, external audit results 2017. Anyone wishes to hold that? No? Carried? Okay. We then have an information previously distributed, an IPD, proposed corporate greenhouse gas emissions reduction target. I would like to lift that item onto the agenda, and I've asked Steve Willis to be able to answer some questions on that item specifically. Given that he had a previous commitment, he's been called out of, he's agreed to be here. If we could move that to put this onto the agenda and move it to the start of the agenda, if that's agreeable. I guess first of all I need to get motion pursuant to subsection 89.3 of Procedure Bylaw 2016-377 that the Environment and Climate Protection Committee approve that the rules of procedure be waived to allow for the consideration of the item listed as IPD, a proposed corporate greenhouse gas emission reductions target. Is that carried?
Carried.
The agenda. Sorry.
Did you move that?
Yes. Okay. And then we also have two, so we will deal with that up front, but we have two motions which require a procedural move here. One was the, the letter regarding landfills that got considerable discussion at council and then was referred back to committee. In order to put that onto the agenda, we require a motion. Actually, I request that someone on the committee move that we put that onto the agenda. Councillor Cloutier.
I would so move the motion to that the Environment and Climate Protection Committee approve the addition of this item for consideration at today's meeting pursuant to subsection 89.3 of Procedures Bylaw. I would so move.
All right, and then the other one, motion recycling and organics at festivals, to put that on the agenda. It makes sense that Councillor Brockington may want to do that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Whereas this is the last meeting of the committee before the summer legislative break, therefore be it resolved that the Environment and Climate Protection Committee approve the addition of this item for consideration at today's meeting pursuant to subsection 89.3 of the Procedure Bylaw 2016-377, and the issue is requesting to initiate formal consultation with special events organizers regarding the introduction of a requirement to provide recycling and organic waste collection at all special events having an expected attendance of at least 500 participants.
Thank you. A little more changes of agenda than normal, but that's fine. What we then have in front of us, we will go straight to the lifted IPD item then. We'll then go through the agenda in order and then take those two new items that have been added in the order in which they were read. We'll do the letter first and then the recycling organics at festivals. All right. I think I follow that. Okay. So, Mr. Willis, if you could come forward, please, for this item. I asked to be lifted because I had a couple of specific questions for it. I gather a couple of my colleagues may do as well.
Yes, I will.
Okay.
Can you add me to your list?
Okay. All right, thank you. And I've got Councillor Brockington, and did Cluche you as well? Brockington, McKinney on that. So, my questions for you, Mr. Willis. We have been through our Carbon 613 membership. It's expected that we have a corporate greenhouse gas reduction target, a short-term one. We already have our 80% reduction by 2050, which is a fairly standard target across the country even. My concern, I absolutely support that we move forward with the target that is being proposed here, but the question would be, why is it necessary? Is it necessary? Can we not move that target right here today?
Mr. Chair, I think there's no barrier to the committee moving the target should it accept it. I mean, council's already made a commitment to have a long-term target as well as a short-term target. We were directed to benchmark a short-term target. We've done that recommendation in the IPD memo. If committee wanted to solidify that with additional strength and pass a motion to adopt that as a target today, it's within committee's purview.
Mm-hmm. And I guess the question to legal, is that something where we are able to do that, and is that considered binding a future council inappropriately, or is that simply an aspirational target that we're approving today?
Mr. Chair, you can't bind future council. So depending on the timelines, they may have to change at the next term.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
You can't bind future council to the target.
We cannot bind future councils to the target.
That is correct.
Okay, and yet we have a target of 80% by 2050 that we've happily adopted.
Mr. Chair, the general principle is that a future council can revisit the decisions of previous councils, but they may stand going forward until a future council does indeed revisit them.
All right, so if I interpret that, we can in fact adopt it, but a future council could choose to overturn it.
That's correct.
Right. Okay, that's useful. One item that's raised here is that this city is supposed to be carrying out an inventory of its greenhouse gas emissions, and already we only report every 4 years as a city, which some consider too sporadically or occasionally to have a real understanding of how well we're doing on our progress if we only know every 4 years. But furthermore, it looks like that's now going to go into 2019. This report tells us that a consulting firm has been hired to do that work for us, if I understand correctly, to reestablish or perhaps get more accurate baseline numbers here. Could you explain the rationale for, I guess, going outside for that advice in the first place? Do we not have staff resources sufficient to do that work? And then why that long time lag, in a sense, failing to meet our 4-year reporting?
So, Mr. Chair, we were beginning the process of replicating our previous review of the inventory based on the methodology we used before. But at the time we retained SSG to do the work for the Energy Evolution Phase 2, we learned that they had done an updated version of their modeling system for the City of Toronto, and we have asked that we take a look at our modeling methodology in light of how other municipalities are actually doing this, and we thought that they added value if we could look at the methodology through the work that they did. Plus, it would be actually unhelpful if we had done a staff projection, arrived at through one methodology and arrived at one number, and they, through Energy Evolution Phase 2, had arrived at a different number. And we thought it was prudent, for the sake of a few months, to get one consultant doing it one way and establishing an updated methodology for us for the future. So we felt it was an actually good use of resources. Albeit it's a few months delay, we still intend to have the results later this year, and those results will be available when we report on the inventory next year and the update on the targets.
Okay, so if I interpret that, you believe it will be better quality, but admittedly late.
It will be a few months later than we anticipated doing it in-house, but we believe that an updated methodology to make ourselves consistent with what other municipalities are doing is worthwhile.
And how about going forward then, where what seems to me, now we don't have staff capable with expertise in absolutely everything, because some fields require an expert that you wouldn't normally have a staff person capable of doing that on as a full-time employee. Is this a field where it would make sense to go out to a consultant each time we're supposed to report, or is this something we should be nurturing, if you will, the in-house capability to do it?
So, Mr. Chair, one of the parts of the SSG assignment is to actually train staff on the methodology that they're using so that we could replicate it in the future in-house.
Okay. Would it be accurate to say then that as a city we would be able to report on them more frequently and meet our deadlines more easily once we go through this round?
That's correct. If once trained on the new methodology, we believe that it would be possible to increase the reporting frequency.
Okay. Because I believe that's very important. As you know, we're seen to the public who do watch these issues, not everyone does, but to those who do, to be slipping without question. And one area is we're a member of the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, Partners for Climate Protection. We are also a member of the Global Covenant of Mayors. Have we submitted our emissions and climate change hazard report to the Global Covenant of Mayors yet?
Our plan is to submit that information at the end of the year when this new updated methodology has been applied and we have an updated inventory.
And is that due or overdue at this time?
So it is overdue, Mr. Chair, but the intention is to get this in this year.
Mm-hmm. I'm gathering there's no penalty for late reporting in this case or anything, so it's just may not look good on the city, but otherwise it's a voluntary membership. All right,
That's correct, Mr. Chair.
While I, and I think a lot of other people, encourage that we be on time with our report cards, at least there won't be a penalty for that. Finally, from me now, as you see my line of questioning around staff resources, this is something that came up when we had our energy evolution debate and passed phase 1 of that plan. Has there been any progress in terms of developing or bringing on more staff resources to support our energy evolution and air quality and climate change management plan are almost interchangeable for a lot of us. They're targeting the same sort of energy efficiency and conservation and renewable energy work, but we lack some of that expertise in-house, and it was certainly brought to our attention and debated by councillors whether we had the sufficient resources. I believe you made a commitment that we would have them. Where are we on that?
So there are two parts to that. One is that we are leveraging an interdepartmental working group and providing additional capability in other groups. For example, our finance department is getting much more involved in measuring and monitoring our energy usage, so they've devoted additional staff time from existing resources to support that. In our own department, Planning, Infrastructure, and Economic Development, we intend to create a new position. We will be creating one new position to support this. We have an FTE now secured for that, but we don't yet have the funding necessary to make that to offer the position at this point in time. With staff retirements and changes and reclassifications, we hope to find those resources, or we'll address that issue in our 2019 budget submission to provide the adequate funding to support that FTE.
Mm-hmm. So at worst, we would need to push for that to be, as councillors, would need to push for that to be included in the budget if staff have not already done that. But is there a possibility that the funding, is there a mechanism for finding that funding any other way than through voting a new budget item for it?
At this point in time, if we were able to do some reclassifications of positions within the department as a result of staff departures and openings, we might be able to free up the budget room within our existing budget to top up the budget we have for the FT we have to make it happen during this fiscal year, and that's what we're going to try to do. If that does not happen, then we will make it part of our 2019 budget submission to top up the difference between what we have available and what we need to secure that position.
Okay. Thank you. Those are my questions, at least for now. I have Councillor Brockington and then McKinney on these. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Willis, for coming this morning. Just so I'm 100% clear, there are two deliverables that I just want to clarify the expected delivery date. One is the GHG emissions inventory that's being worked on. What is the slated completion date for this?
Mr. Chair, the consultant's expected to deliver that late fall.
Of this year?
Of this year.
Okay. And does that mean that comes to committee? Is this the last committee meeting of this calendar year?
It is the last committee meeting prior to our council break. It's to be determined still whether one is held during the, well, it's likely there would be one in the calendar year, yes. Okay. Whether it's prior, whether the September 18th one happens based on whether there's substantive items, and as everybody knows, it's in the middle of an election period with a whole variety of restrictions. That remains to be determined, but there will be at least one in this calendar year.
Okay, that was a long answer. And the AQCCMP review, just to clarify again, is this the one where you're saying the consultant is going to take some extra couple months to get that delivered? Originally it's January 2019. Are we on track for that, or what is the expected delivery date?
So, Mr. Chair, SSG has been retained for energy evolution and an updated greenhouse gas inventory, so it's separate from the AQCC MP update. We will be reporting on AQCC MP update in the beginning of 2019 as planned. Okay. It's just our greenhouse gas inventory update, which we'd hoped would be towards the tail end of the summer, is going to take a few more months to get done because of the retaining SSG to do that.
The benefit of keeping on track for this report is that it will inform the next council before they identify their strategic priorities. They need to have that information, so we're on schedule for that. And just a request from some environment groups in my ward is about the frequency of our GHG emissions reductions, the type of energy use that is being used in the city, and the availability of data. Is there an intent to make this information available on an annual basis?
Mr. Chair, I hear the remarks last time and this time about increasing the frequency. While we maintain that many municipalities use the 4-year cycle, we believe this new methodology will make it easier for us to collect the data, and I think we are examining a 2-year frequency of this to address the concerns that we've heard.
Yeah, and I think we all agree that getting data every 4 years, if the committee wants to tweak its direction, wants to react to something that maybe is not achieving targets, that we need data much more frequently than every 4 years. Finally, will there be specific targets for departments within the city to contribute towards that GHG reduction target?
Mr. Chair, as I understand it, it's more organized towards emission sources as opposed to departments. So we would have, vehicle-related emissions, building-related emissions, those sorts of things is the way it's broken down rather than on a department-by-department basis, which is an easier way to measure and monitor as well.
So who is ultimately responsible then?
Mr. Chair, ultimately, our department is responsible for coordinating the strategy and gathering information from each of the departments and reporting to committee. Ultimately, committee has oversight on this issue, and the broader administration of the city is responsible for implementing the plan.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair, for allowing us questions on this important item.
Thank you very much. Councillor McKinney.
Thank you, Chair. I suppose that it makes sense that many of us in both the community and around this table are skeptical that we are going to reach anywhere near our targets. We didn't in the past, and the fact that we're not reporting out every 4 years raises just so many questions. I mean, we approved, or the last council approved in 2014 the Air Quality Climate Change Management Plan. It was, brought forward as a term of council priority, in 2015, and through the budget process also in 2015. And we're already a year overdue in terms of reporting out on our GHG inventory. And we know that we didn't do well between 2004, I believe, and 2012. We missed the mark by a large number. I believe it was 12% corporate emissions and 12% community emissions, and only 6% corporate. And do we know in that time how much of that was actually achieved as a result of the provinces phasing out of coal?
So, Mr. Chair, we do know that the phasing out of coal will have had a large effect on the number. One of the biggest changes that will be going forward, we will see, is the conversion from the diesel bus fleet to electric vehicles on the light rail transit system will be one of the next big milestones that will cause a fairly significant change in those numbers. But to the councillor's point, historic in the last number of years, the change in the electricity supply itself has been a big contributor.
So not much that we did as a city contributed to the reduction in community emissions.
Mr. Chair, I don't think that's a fair characterization. I think we've done in a number of different areas, a number of energy demand management practices that have been significant. We've done work in the street lighting program. Ottawa Community Housing has done a fair bit in terms of energy demand management in their portfolio, and those are all continuing. I accept that there will be people who feel that we could have done more in more areas, and that is not without saying that we have made progress in a number of areas. We have room to do more. We have room to do more on managing the energy operations of this city. We have room to do on energy management and in buildings and energy performance in buildings, and we have more to do in other areas in terms of fleet and the electrical supply related to the transportation system as well. But these are all opportunities we've identified for the future.
So can I ask your professional opinion then, if we don't have clear targets and we aren't, especially if we aren't looking at today what we've achieved and we're not reporting out, how do we know that we're actually moving towards our targets, and how do we know when it will be too late? between now and late fall 2018, is there a point where we can say, honestly, that we're not going to reach our targets? We haven't had the reporting, so we don't know. We don't know where we're at. Maybe we're close, but probably not. But my concern is that at some point it will be too late. We're not going to meet them. We know we're not going to meet them, but we're not taking the actions needed to meet them, or making that decision as a council body to say, look, we're nowhere close, but we don't have that information. So at what point, and maybe it's a rhetorical question, maybe you can't answer that for me, but at some point it will be too late.
Mr. Chair, that is a more rhetorical question, but perhaps I can answer it in the way Councillor Brockington just framed it, is that we are doing an inventory. We will report this year. We will report at a time at which that information will be available to the incoming council to inform it on its priority setting, and we will be reporting on the strategy in 2019, and should council decide to make revisions, changes at that point, there will be an opportunity at that point. This is a pragmatic rollout of gathering the information, putting it into the planning cycle and process, and we, from where we're at today, we will have better information by the end of the year.
And with that, will we get from you clear direction on what our budgetary requirements are? I think that question's been asked of housing, for example. Tell us what we need and let us decide. If it's this much, we need to decide. So will we also get from you, and I guess I'm asking, I would like to see from you, what would be the budgetary requirements for reducing, for meeting our targets in both corporate and community GHG emissions in the next budget round? And let us decide how much and how we're going to invest that.
Mr. Chair, I think in the context of the term of council strategic priorities, we can put options on the table for the incoming council on different scenarios. I think that's the appropriate place to place that information, and then from the process of looking at the strategic priorities of council, that will inform the budget process. During the budget process, the way we normally do it, it doesn't present the options methodology, but the term of council strategic priorities does.
Thank you, and that's a problem with our budgeting. That's not your problem. So, but I do appreciate that we will have the opportunity. The next council will have the opportunity through the term of council priorities to make that decision of whether we're going to abandon our targets, essentially, or do everything we can with a robust plan and the budgetary requirements to actually meet those targets. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Blais.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I apologize if some of these questions are perhaps redundant or history lessons for some, but for myself, can you recall to me how the targets were established? So why was 2012 chosen as the target date? Was this a recommendation from staff, so experts in our staff, or was this something thrown out on the table by a politician?
Mr. Chair, since I wasn't here, Ms. Brown's going to...
I'm happy to have whomever answer the questions. Yeah.
Mr. Chair, the 2012 baseline was chosen as that was the year that we had the most robust data, okay, as opposed to the 1990 baseline, which we had previously, which unfortunately had, we found some errors in that baseline. The short-term target, the 2012 by 2024, was approved as part of the Air Quality and Climate Change Management Plan, and the 80% by 2050 target was approved by a motion by Council.
So the short-term plan, though, was recommended by experts as part of the staff report to committee and council at the time?
That is correct.
Okay. Is this is a corporate plan, so this is not to account for all individual citizen use of emissions, etc. It's for Ottawa as an institution. Okay, and we include police, library, like what's the breadth of what we include in that?
Mr. Chair, as part of the corporate inventory, we look at facilities, fleet, which includes municipal fleet, police fleet, and transit fleet, waste and wastewater operations.
And Hydro Ottawa?
Mr. Chair, hydro auto is not included as part of our corporate inventory.
Okay. And so, I'm thinking about it. Since 2012, we've built 3 new rec centers, several new fire stations, several new outdoor sporting facilities that are fully lit, community centers, I'm sure, across the city. For us to actually have a reduction, all of those buildings have to be net zero, and then we will have had to renovate old buildings to reduce on top of that, right? Am I wrong in my kind of assumptions?
So, Mr. Chair, Councillor Boy has a point that when you have additional facilities that are adding to the overall inventory, that is part of it. We do need, in order to achieve these targets, to find efficiencies in other areas, and that will come in forms of changes in the fleet. As I said, the move from diesel to electric in terms of transit will be a big significant change when that comes in play later this year. It also will have to come through building renovations and changes and other reductions throughout the system.
Sure, and I appreciate that, but I guess I'm asking, do our targets include, or should they include, changes to account for growth? Because all of our new buildings are not net zero, right? Many of them are hitting LEED standards, but they're not hitting LEED Platinum standards, or most aren't, and they're certainly not net zero. So how do we actually accommodate for 2 to 3% population growth and reduce emissions at the same time? Reduce raw data emissions.
I think, Mr. Chair, I think the council is raising an interesting point about how you report absolute GHG emissions and GHG emissions on a per capita basis, or some measure of the way we relate to growth. I think it's a fair question, and it's something we should ask the consultants to assist us and see what their recommendations are on how we do it, so we could present both pieces of data. I mean, I think the global objective is that communities in general are reducing the amount of GHGs they're emitting, but in a growth context that is a bit of a challenge for us.
No, I appreciate it. I think it would be helpful to get them in both, because if the goal is to achieve it at a baseline level, then every new building has to be net zero, right? Because we can't possibly increase emissions and find enough renovations in our older buildings to decrease. Like, it's impossible. Unless you got a tree that's printing money somewhere, it's just not going to happen. So what is other than science has changed and data capability has changed, how do we account for the difference in what our baseline methodologies will be between 2012 and this new methodology you're going to come up with? Like, how do we know that we're anywhere close with the new methodology for collection to how we were doing it in 2012 to have a proper comparison?
So one of the things that has happened in the last number of years, Mr. Chair, is that the data is becoming easier to get. It used to be a very laborious manual process to get it. One of the pieces that we're doing internally is the finance department is starting to consolidate the staff who are actually tracking energy-related expenditures, money on electricity payments, natural gas, diesel, and other, propane, all those other sorts of emissions. We're actually getting better data into our own, we're managing the data better ourselves, so make it easier to get. The other half of the councillor's question is really, when we report on the new inventory, we'll have to explain the differences in the methodology so that that's clearly understood. But we do want to bring our methodology in a manner that's consistent in the way other municipalities are reporting, and that may actually be quite relevant in our ability to seek federal funding in the future as well, because they'll be looking at a certain methodology as well for the way we collect data.
Sure. And when you bring the next round of data forward, are you going to be able to do a forward-looking projection to say, all things being equal, based on what's in the corporate plan for infrastructure construction, facility construction, fleet growth, etc., all things being equal, we will or we will not hit target 2024 based on what is in the corporate plan at the time of presenting the report?
So, Mr. Chair, not as part of the reporting on the inventory, but as part of the QCC MP update in the new year, we do report on what we call a business as usual case, which would take into account what you're suggesting, which is the effects of the natural effects of growth of our facilities and fleet to accommodate population growth. So that information will be available, and then the projections will relate on the basis of a comparison to the business as usual.
And is it valuable to consider that in staff reports going forward, probably as part of a governance review, generally in a staff report we have financial implications, legal implications. I thought there was an environmental implications sections, perhaps I'm wrong, but would it be valuable for things that we know are going to change greenhouse gas emissions to have an item within the report articulating that? So we're approving a new rec center. This is how it's going to change GHGs. We're approving the purchase of 27 new ambulances. This is how it's going to change GHGs, et cetera.
Mr. Chair, I think the councillor is correct that the governance review is a good time to raise that issue, and I think if that was a methodology to assist council from understanding the implications, that is workable, I believe.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, and that's a very interesting point you raise, Councillor Blais. That's something that some cities do, perhaps not a lot, where it's quite standard that there would be greenhouse gas implications, emissions implications of any major policy decision or purchase or that sort of thing. So while that isn't something that's within our mandate to approve today, it's certainly something we should be thinking about, we or whoever sits in our seats at governance review next time that we adopt that. It's only logical that we then track quite regularly and can make our decisions based on those implications. Councillor Leeper, you have a motion. You may have questions as well. I'm not sure, but would you like to go?
Thank you, Chair. And I would just preface it by noting Councillor Blais has asked the same question that I have, which is the absolute versus relative increase in greenhouse gases. But what I think is important to note is that the climate itself has thresholds at which once we reach, the temperatures rise, and we cannot make the assumption that we can continue down a status quo path. If we don't have some fundamentally big changes in the amount of emissions that we're putting out, we are as a globe going to reach those thresholds. We cannot make the assumption that we can just leave things the status quo. We have to actually do an absolute reduction in the number of greenhouse gases, particularly if the city is going to continue to grow. I think the denominator is critical. I have heard and chatted with a few colleagues around the table this afternoon that there is an appetite to do this before the next term of council, and so I would like to put a motion on the floor, Mr. Chair, that whereas it is the stated intention of staff to recommend as part of the 2019 AQCCM review a corporate GHG reduction target of 20% below 2012 baseline levels, and whereas the proposed 20% target is consistent with the Federation of Canadian Municipalities Partners for Climate Protection Program's recommended target setting and the targets of other comparable Canadian municipalities, whereas the proposed 2012 baseline would align with the council-approved short and long-term community GHG emission reduction target, and whereas the proposed 2024 end date would align with the council-approved short-term GHG emissions reduction target. Therefore, be it resolved that the Environment and Climate Protection Committee recommend council adopt a corporate GHG reduction target of 20% below 2012 baseline targets by 2024. If this passes, I would certainly be interested to see if the next council wants to revisit it, but I suspect that this could become our policy moving forward from this date forward. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. If we have no further questions for staff on this item, particularly Mr. Willis, who I committed to trying to get out the door back to where he was supposed to be as soon as possible, if that's acceptable, we'll thank Mr. Willis for coming, and then we can carry on receiving this and potentially and debating the motion that's in front of us. So we do have a motion. I saw no other further speakers, certainly to asking questions at this point. Would anyone like to speak to Councillor Leeper's motion? Okay. Seeing none, I would speak briefly then that it seems only logical. This is, on the downside, this isn't making making the city any more ambitious than it currently is, because we've already adopted an 80% by 2050 target. This is simply setting an interim target, which we did commit to when we joined Carbon 613. All members of that group have set their own, whether it be banks or stores or even the bed and breakfast, right, Angela, have adopted targets, and the city was beginning to stand out for not having adopted an interim or a shorter term target. So Councillor Leeper has moved that we do adopt that. It is, I would say, on the curve towards where we've already committed to go. So I think it is only logical that we approve this. I guess is this motion carried? Carried? All right. Thank you. All right, we now move then, I see Ms. Clark has moved in, we move to a related agenda item, number 1 on our list, which is energy evolution. I'll find my notes here. You have a short presentation for us, so if we could start by going to the presentation, and then we do have some delegations signed up for this. I would take this moment to remind anyone who is in the audience who may like to speak to this item and has not already registered, please do that. You would have 5 minutes to speak to the item. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of committee, thank you for allowing me to present today. With the approval of Energy Evolution Phase 1 in December of last year, staff were asked to come back in Q2 of this year to report. So that's why I'm here today. As a bit of a refresher from Phase 1, this vision for energy evolution was created by the sounding board. That was 150 members of the public, mainly businesses, that have gotten together to create this vision for Ottawa. And that is, Ottawa is a thriving city powered by clean, renewable energy. And there was a 3-pronged approach to get to this vision. The intention was to reduce energy use through conservation and efficiency, to reduce the supply of renewable energy through local and regional production, and to prioritize the procurement of clean renewable energy. That is the basis and fundamental framework for the vision. Also, the council direction to do this project required that that staff look at the current state of energy supply and demand and complete a baseline analysis, and that we did that in Phase 1. It also directs that opportunities be assessed with community partners for renewable energy generation, energy conservation, and energy efficiency. Energy generation, renewable energy generation, we also addressed in Phase 1. So that leaves us 2 component pieces for this Phase 2 for efficiencies and conservation. Also, a bit of a reminder that we already discussed that in the previous IPD item. Council in 2016 directed a target for Ottawa and its community partners to reduce GHG emissions below 2012 levels, 80% by 2050. And this is not an uncommon target. The province, the federal government, and many, many Canadian cities also have this target. With the approval of the Phase 1 Energy Evolution in December, there were 33 actions that came out of that. Of those projects, 19 are underway, and a few examples of the more, I find, interesting ones, high-profile ones at any rate, is the Community Energy Innovation Fund, of which funding was approved by Council last year for $500,000. We received 20 applications for this fund. It's been highly successful and oversubscribed, the value being over $1 million for those applications. So staff will be reviewing those over the next few weeks and determine how this funding gets allocated. That'll be done with staff and a couple of community partners. We'll sit on a committee to determine that. Another interesting project is Gladstone Village. Many of you already are aware of this project, and they're still in the scoping phase. Ottawa Community Housing is taking charge of this, but also partnering with the city and federal governments to to be able to provide a mixed income, low carbon community. So that could possibly run on district energy, will likely have LED lighting, insulated to a much higher standard. Some of you are aware of OCH's other projects, the Clementine House that they built to a passive house standard. So they're already experienced in this type of development and have opportunities as a nonprofit and a housing corporation to also get funding from the province and the federal governments for that. As a bonus to this development, it's a growth node. So really densities are, there's a lot of potential for high density at this location, being an LRT stop as well. Biogas is another opportunity for city facilities. Planning is working with Public Works to develop a biogas optimization study. So we have good potential to use biogas at city facilities and through that reduce the city's GHG emissions, enhance our energy security, and also support rural biogas producers in Ottawa. Catalyst projects. This was in 2017 an amount of $300,000 approved by council for projects, 7 of which were taken through from start to finish last year, and each of them had the opportunity to increase energy literacy, and they also piloted emerging technologies and innovative approaches in Ottawa. Some of these included the Climate-Wise Retrofit Project, OCH's tenant engagement pilot that focused on increased energy efficiency and literacy in nonprofit community housing through education and engagement. EnviroCenter also created a dashboard to assist the community businesses to understand GHG emissions much better. Another part of that you saw in the report is the amount for Hydro Ottawa for the dividends. 8 projects are assigned to that, and details of that are in document 2 attached to the committee report. So phase 2 of energy evolution will address primarily energy conservation and efficiency, as I mentioned before, and primarily to do with buildings, transportation, energy storage, and waste management. We know especially that transportation and buildings account for almost 90% of Ottawa's GHG emissions, so they will be scrutinized very closely. We've hired SSG, Sustainability Solutions Group, and What If to work on the project for us. This team has worked on dozens of municipal renewable energy strategies across Canada, including Toronto's Transform TO project and Markham's Getting to Zero municipal energy plan. So they'll be very helpful to have them on board with us. One key piece of work they will be doing once they have completed the phase 2 pathway studies and analysis is to merge phase 1 and 2, those pieces together to identify 1 or 2 alternative scenarios and help us quantify the potential impacts associated with different actions and approaches. So then we can help identify and prioritize where we need to put our efforts, so it'll be a very valuable tool for us. And actually create our strategy and our roadmap to 2050. 8 pathways will be studied through this phase 2 of the project. The first is the electrification of transport. These will include things like city buses, school buses, service vehicles, intercity freight, and car and light truck fleets. The second pathway would be transportation optimization. So we'll look at the modal shift according to the transportation in the next time horizon. That will be a consideration, along with vehicles, kilometers traveled, and growth management implications. So this piece of work will be an important factor to consider in the next official plan review and transportation master plan review too. Pathways 2 and 3 are with regards to smaller and newer large and smaller new buildings. And we'll be looking at building code changes and incentives per of these building structures and systems for those different sizes of buildings. Pathways 5 and 6 will look at existing buildings, both smaller and larger, and look at things like incentives, possible sources of financing, performance, benchmarking, and retrofit best practices by building type or age. Pathway 7 will include a look at energy storage and demand management. That will include things like thermal storage, managing the summer and winter peaks, electricity storage and demand management, also battery storage for large buildings or feeder lines, local demand response, and the use of surplus base load for thermal. So just to note that what it will not look at is energy storage on transmission or sub-transmission infrastructure, energy storage for emergency backup or fuel storage. So provincial considerations are a different animal. And then the last is to look at waste, which includes solid municipal waste, wastewater, crop and forestry residues, as well as snow management. Besides the pathways, technical workshops using the developed pathways as well as the consultant modeling will be used to draw out the short-term and medium-term actions for the strategy. We used this methodology in our phase 1, and it was very successful working with our community partners to overcome barriers and develop partnerships and ultimately the action plan. So we'd like to do that again. Community partners are of course vital to our process, and that includes internal and external working groups. The internal working group is comprised of a group of affected city departments. The external working group is a subset of subject matter experts from the sounding board. So we got the technical experts around the table to discuss how the plan is developing, the different documents, products developed by the consultant before they go out. This is literally our 12-step program. We're at about stage 5, so we've developed a charter, engagement strategies. We've hired our consultant on board right now, and we've already met once with our internal and external working groups. So overall, when you look at this program, we hope to have the strategy completed by June of next year, at which time it would go public. We'll post it online for comment and then come to committee September or October of next year is our objective. And what's next? Right now we have our consultants working on data gathering. So they are first developing a summary paper on the modeling methodology. It'll be quite a technical document, but we'll put those out to our working groups. And then they'll develop a business as planned technical paper, start development on the 8 pathways, the technical papers for the fall. Staff will start developing the Cafe X platform for our sounding board and working groups, so it's a tighter, easier way to disperse information to the people that we need to get feedback from. Staff will also continue working on the phase 1 actions and the hydro dividend surplus projects as well, the 8 that are coming out of that, and then work on also the approval of the Community Energy Improvement Fund projects. So that'll take us into the fall once we have workshops, technical workshops on the pathways, and then we take it to the next stage with modeling in the winter. So that's where we're at. Does anyone have questions? More than happy to answer any.
Thank you very much. Do we have questions for staff? Councillor Kakish.
Thank you, Chair. And I had some questions from residents with regards to the data collection that we're doing and if it's going to be consumption-based versus in boundary with the direction that we're giving SSG in terms of the numbers that they're doing for the inventory.
I'm sorry, say again, it's consumption-based numbers?
Consumption-based inventory as opposed to in boundary with regards to the direction that we're giving. So are we going to be calculating just things that are being within the boundary of City of Ottawa, or for example, as it was explained to me, if we're bringing things from outside as well, and why we're giving direction to the consultant to do either, or if that's how we're proceeding, or are those still things that we can give direction to the consultant in terms of data collection?
Right. Our data collection is primarily focused within the City of Ottawa, but recognizing that how we implement our strategy could have effects on adjacent neighbors and adjacent municipalities. So that is a concern and consideration, and they as consultants have experienced that as well. So we're going to be working very closely with them to see if there are certain areas that do affect external, our neighbors or Ontario. Do we have to look a little deeper, or how could we manage that? So that will be explained through that process, through that methodology.
That was one of the points that was brought to my attention, and the other one was as well from various environmental groups, so as regards to having the raw data as well and the open data, and not just sort of the the numbers that are going to be provided by the consultant, but actually having access to that raw data. Is that something that's possible as well by
I believe that should be possible. We had a comment like that at our working group, and our consultant was confident that we could provide and release some data to that effect. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, and it was my mistake. We usually go to delegations before having questions of staff, so I'll return to our normal procedure. I have on the list in front some clarification here. There may be a change representing some organizations, but first of all, I have Georges Simard. George here? Okay, George would be first. I've got Jennifer Stelzer from Enviro Center, Carbon 613. I'm not seeing her here. Rob Barnes, were you in place of or separate from? Separate from, okay. So after, unless she appears just in time, it would be Angela Keller-Herzog, who I see, followed by Rob Barnes, followed by Diane Beck. If there's others who want to be on the list, please do sign up. Register at the desk, please. All right, thank you. Mr. Smart, I'm not sure if you've appeared before committee before, but standard procedure, minutes to speak, and then members of the committee may have questions for you afterwards. Thank you. Please go ahead and press the button in front of you. Your microphone should go red.
Yes, good morning. My name is Georges Simard, and I have been the owner of a Lower Town residence for the last 24 years and counting. I am here today to inform this committee that the City of Ottawa, knowingly and in full complicity, allow an extra 2 million cars a year to enter the city and pollute the environment of its citizens. On a daily basis, over 8,000 cars that contribute to the city's growing carbon footprint when their occupants ought to be taking public transit. Why are they driving in instead of taking the bus? Because they have access to cheap illegal parking on residential properties. This situation results from the fact that city management stubbornly refuses to enforce its own bylaws number 2008-250, Section 54, 55.1, and 100 that prohibits such practice, namely the illegal prohibited rental of parking spaces within residential areas of the city. Reference Appendix A. This information came to my attention further to a complaint I made on October 15, 2010 to the city and my councillor Mathieu Fleury about the violation of the previously mentioned sections. This was confirmed by 6 different municipal authorities familiar with the city bylaws and the enforcement, and also confirmed in an Ottawa Citizen article published by U. Adamy on March 9, 2013, reference Appendix B. It has been 7 long years since my original complaint, which is still unresolved to this day. I conducted my own investigation via the Access to Information Act of the City of Ottawa and Gatineau records going back 10 years to determine if these bylaws have been enforced and if I could pinpoint a trend in regards to violations. No records were found for the City of Ottawa. As for the City of Gatineau, it has been aggressively and successfully enforcing identical bylaws. Over the period of 1 year, 213 illegal parking sites were identified for a total of 1,020 parking spaces. This enforcement resulted in 211 charges, of which 29 cases representing 108 charges were ruled by a judge, generating $51,000 in fine and court costs. In so doing, the city of Gatineau eliminated the carbon footprint of all these
Mr.
vehicles.
Smart, I do need to remind you we are at Environment and Climate Protection Committee debating the Energy Evolution Plan at the moment. You do appear to have some significant concerns and some complaints about bylaw enforcement, and I did let that go, but the city of Gatineau has nothing to do with what we're here today. If you could bring this back to our quest to become a energy efficient city, then I can let you continue, but otherwise you are at the wrong forum.
Well, I was told by the person I contacted that this was regarding the reduction of the carbon footprint of transportation.
That is right, but listing bylaw complaints and referring to the city of Gatineau is gone out.
The reason why I have to go to the city of Gatineau because Gatineau has records, but not Ottawa. So how am I supposed to figure out exactly how much is going on in Ottawa? Do you want me to finish?
You will return to the topic in front of us. Yes, please.
Beg pardon?
If you could focus on our energy evolution strategy and commitment. Yes, please go ahead. You have 2 minutes and 30 seconds remaining.
Okay, in so doing, the city of Gatineau limited the carbon footprint of all the vehicles. A follow-up on the investigation revealed that most of the violators were now using public transit to go to work. Again, my question here is why is the city of Ottawa allowing this carbon footprint to take place on its territory by not enforcing its own bylaws? Does not have the mandate and duty to do so? Does not have the authority to enforce its own bylaws? Reference Appendix C. By not limiting this carbon footprint, other negative repercussions are affecting the management of the city where between $11 and $14 million in revenue is being lost each year. Which transport is flirting with a deficit due to lower ridership, at least 8,000 users a day, and undermine its expected revenue by millions. This has been confirmed by Councillor Stephen Blais, chair of OC Citizen article dated May 25, 2017, that for the first quarter of 2017, OC Transport undershot its expected revenue by $3.9 million, for which the number of people taking the transit play a major role. Appendix D. This committee has the power to eliminate this carbon footprint for the health and financial benefit of all Ottawa citizens by asking ad questions to the mayor, my councillor Mathieu Fleury, and councillor chair of the Community and Public Services under whose responsibility the enforcement of this bylaw falls under, as to why the city has not been diligently enforcing all of the city's zoning bylaws, number 2008-15, allowing this carbon footprint to persist, and this for over the last 10 years. I hope that this committee will not discard my information as frivolous or unreliable without first checking the facts presented and doing your own investigation, as I'm confident you will find reliable. In closing, I would like to inform this committee that I'm receptive to sharing all my information and supporting documents associated with your investigation, as this short presentation provides time for only a summary of the situation, as well as a sample of the documents that I have in my possession. Please feel free to ask me any questions.
Well, thank you very much. The point I'm taking from that is lack of bylaw enforcement, more people choosing to car commute rather than use transit, and its greenhouse gas implications. Do we have any committee who wish to ask questions to the delegation?
And I do believe that these two go hand in hand. How can you eliminate carbon footprint if you don't stop the cars from coming in?
They certainly are related. Thank you.
People feel free to come in because they have cheap parking. That affects not only me, everybody in the city, every citizens.
They certainly do. To Councillor Moffat, please.
Just a brief comment to just some future advice. Instead of printing off this package of 9 papers to each one of us, you could have just emailed us. You don't need to. I mean, we try to reduce the amount of paper that we use here at the committee, and I know you're big on reducing your carbon footprint, so you don't need to give us this big, massive package. Everything here could have just easily been emailed to us.
Okay. I'm not familiar with your system, so I've just made sure to make copies, and I asked if I could bring copies. I said yes, and was told how many numbers of copies to be made. So this is what I did.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Do we have any other questions? No, seeing none. I appreciate you coming for the committee, and you make a valid point. Thank you. We are now moving then to, unless Jennifer Stelzer has come, no, then it will be Angela Keller-Herzog. And you are presenting on behalf of cafes. Now, I did not get it formally. I gather you've asked for a longer time because you're representing a number of groups. But it isn't standard that we do that. Usually any group just has 5 minutes. I will give you a couple of extra minutes. Let's go with 7 and a compromise here.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. So my name is Angela Keller-Herzog, and I'm here representing the Community Associations for Environmental Sustainability. For those of you not familiar, this organization was founded in 2010, and we are a forum for representatives of community and residents associations to meet, exchange, and engage with the City of Ottawa on environmental issues. So on the occasion of the Energy Evolution Update, as this term of council is coming to a close, I think it's a good time to ask ourselves and Council some questions. And Councillor McKenney, in her earlier comments, was hinting in this direction also. So if we want to know, are we on track? Are we on track to meeting our greenhouse action target? Are we on track to shifting to a lower carbon economy? What does the evidence tell us? Did Ottawa emissions go up or down over this term of council that you have been good enough to provide your local leadership? I think it'd be interesting for you to write your private answer on a piece of paper and compare those. We don't have time for that. But I don't think it's obvious at all what the answers would be. So I'm having trouble with this clicker. Maybe this will work. So this, okay, so that will go one by one. All right, so we very much welcome the presentation of the Energy Evolution Strategy Update. It's excellent that we're getting more detailed information on how the Catalyst projects are doing, the Energy Evolution Phase 1 actions. Congratulations to staff on the timely launch of the C Fund, which we expressed some concern about that would be slow. It's the Energy Evolution Phase 2 plans sound very good, and it's good to know too about the hydro surplus spending plan information. That was all information presented for this agenda item. We also very much welcome the rollout of the planned Energy Evolution website, which will be a web page of the City of Ottawa. We're hoping this can become a bit of a Ottawa knowledge where we can then continue to learn about the lessons learned of these demonstration and pilot projects. Because it's one thing to have these little projects, it's another thing for all of us to then benefit and learn the lessons. However, we cannot assume that just because we have an impressive list of small demonstration projects and ad hoc opportunities that have been seized, that this will be enough to set us really on a path to meet the target. We don't currently have a plan that will get us to the target. What we have is we have a number of very excellent building blocks in terms of strategy work, but we don't have a plan. So in this context, we very much warmly welcome that the Energy Evolution Phase 2 consultants will also work on a more robust modeling and assessment tool to help council, staff, and community partners determine where to prioritize efforts over the medium and long term. And in the detailed reporting, there's also mentioned that they will put forward a long roadmap. So these are the pieces that we need as a city, as a community, and we are very, very pleased that pieces haven't been dropped. I'm also hoping one day to be able to get the terms of reference for this consultancy. I think that kind of information would be useful to everyone. We also welcome the stakeholder engagement and education strategy that staff have obviously spent quite a lot of time on, and we also appreciate the signal that City's senior management is now engaged on this climate action file. That's really a good sign. We have 3 concerns, and I'm very happy that some of these concerns were actually discussed in the earlier discussion on the agenda item, which initially wasn't on the agenda. So the 3 concerns are the lack of Ottawa emissions reporting, the delay in setting city corporate emissions target, and timeliness, the risk of delay of deliverables that will cause confusion and a poor start to the strategic priority setting of the next term of council. I have 3 slides that unpack these concerns a bit more. So in terms of carbon emissions reporting, we haven't had an inventory since 2012. So when the city says our standard is every 4 years, well, it's now really 6 years later if I count the simple math. And in the earlier discussion, heard that the consultants would have the information by later this year, but I'm still not totally clear on when it would enter the public domain. But I think it's very promising that the work is now getting done and we will have an emissions report. I think it's disappointing for you as councillors that over your term of council, you essentially have not had this information. So you don't know if Ottawa's emissions are going up or down during your watch. The second concern is regarding the city corporate emissions target. So thank you very much, Councillor Leeper, for introducing the motion earlier, and thank you to this committee for your support. I would like to add, very related to this, that if you're going to set a corporate emissions target, that's for the city, it would be very useful to break this target into area and departmental sub-targets so that it's clear who is actually responsible for managing this. The whole point of measuring and having targets is so that we will then get traction and manage things. So that would be a useful thing. The other interesting thing in the context of the corporate emissions is that the City of Ottawa already produces an annual report on this, except that it's not in the public domain, except that you probably haven't seen this report. And this is in the context of the city reporting to Carbon 613. So again, this is an issue of, I think, governance and transparency. I don't think us environmentalists and community residents should have to ATIP this kind of report, which is really for all of our information. And so I think that hopefully the future use of this website will be to do better in terms of putting data, information, reporting that already exists into the public domain. The third concern was regarding timeliness, and thank you very much, Councillor Brockington, for raising those issues earlier. There's already quite a lot of confusion about what is the air quality and climate change management plan all about, which was created in the previous term of council, and what's energy evolution all about, which was created in your current term of council. So to finish the reporting on the AQCCMP for the next council to be informed is really critical. We've had a lot of slippage on the climate change file. Things have taken years longer than anticipated under your watch. So I think that checking up on that to make sure that we get that reporting for the January Environment Committee meeting is going to be quite important. And just because Christmas is right before it, that's something to be already anticipated, right? So I'm looking forward to those reports, and then hopefully we can have an excellent strategic priority setting exercise next spring. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela, for your engagement, passion, and critiques on this file over a number of years. And thank you for coming before committee. Do we have any questions? I see Councillor Wilkinson.
Yeah. Thank you. I just noticed on one of your slides you said hydro surplus spending plan. Which hydro are you talking about there?
Okay, so at the late last year, around the budget discussions for budget 2018, there was a side discussion that the surplus of dividends that Ottawa has to the City of Ottawa, the precise amount wasn't known at the time, but it was anticipated that there would be some revenues. And it was then agreed provisionally that if there were revenues, 2/3 would be spent on potholes. That was Councillor Harder moving in on her priorities. And then Councillor Chernichenko was able to earmark 1/3 of those revenues for energy efficiency and renewable energy projects. So there's now a list of proposed spending out of, I think, 660 million in hydro revenues.
I'm on the hydro board, but the actual amount will be noticed they're coming to make the report to council on July the 11th, I believe. And I know what it is, but I can't mention it till we get the publicly out there. And then it's up to council to do that. Every year, the amount that's determined from that varies a lot. There's a base minimum, which they have put in the budget. It may go over that. There may be times when we're going under and we have to actually find extra money to pay the base minimum. So can't count on it every year. We're going to have, I think, a couple of good years, and then we see it going down simply because we're putting so much money into developing new hydroelectric plants, which are helping on all of this greenhouse gas things. But it takes money to do that. But I think that perhaps the chair could ask a few questions of the Board of Hydro Ottawa when he makes the presentation that will make that clear too. Mm-hmm. Thanks.
Thank you. Do we see any other questions oh yes, Councillor Brockington. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your presentation this morning. And just one question. The corporation's contribution to GHGs is a fraction of all GHGs in the city. And we focused on what the corporation itself can do with its own assets, buildings, and vehicles. But we fall miserably short in, I think, a major contributor in that are households and businesses, and what the role the corporation can play in educating public on how to make modifications to their residents, or to landlords what they can do. A lot of homes that are older have, poor insulation, are not up to the code of today. So I don't want to put you on the spot, but what can the city do better, in your opinion, to communicate, encourage homeowners, landlords in this regard, to make changes to ultimately reduce their GHG emissions?
Well, I think that public education, it's a struggle, right? So for example, we get regular flyers in terms of what to include in our green black box, and we still know that there's a long ways to go in terms of knowing what item to put in what box. So a lot of it isn't just a one-time delivery of information, and then you can say, oh, on February 16th, we sent around a flyer to all households and told them that styrofoam should go in the garbage. That doesn't mean that the public all gets it. So I think that the public education campaigns need to be repetitive, varied, and I think you need a variety of strategy to reach a variety of types of households. So I think sometimes you need to be doing a better job of targeting. I think that there's an excellent amount of work already provincially funded that's being done through the gas billing and the hydro billing. So I regularly get all kinds of fancy analysis from hydro telling me that, my phantom power usage uses $56 per month, and I really should do something about that. So there's quite a lot of information, but I think that we need to be have a greater breadth of the kind of engagement points to educate homeowners or educate tenants educate young people or educate disadvantaged populations. I think that there's a big carbon lens that could also be applied to all the different kind of policy points where the city touches on what happens in the housing sector. So, for example, if developers got some kind of a rebate for having net carbon zero buildings and exceeded the requirements of the Ontario Building Code, there's nothing preventing the city, for example, to provide education and incentives to the development community, so that certainly on the new building front we could get much more rapid action. I think the City of Toronto has looked at doing that kind of stuff. There's lots of good examples of what other cities are doing too that we can learn from.
Thank you very much. Any further questions for the delegation? No, seeing none. Thank you for coming. Next on the list then is Rob Barnes. Got that in order, yeah. Hi, thank you for coming. You have 5 minutes, and are you on behalf of Enviro Center, or sorry, Ecology Ottawa?
Yes, I will be speaking. I'm speaking on behalf of Ecology Ottawa, an Ottawa-based environmental organization working to make our city the green capital of Canada, and we work across a variety of issues, and obviously climate change is a foremost concern and really feeds into all of the work that we do. I just wanted to say a few things this morning, comment on the update. First of all, we do support the motion. We like the idea that the city is moving ahead with some of these important projects. You can see the long list of phase 1 projects that are well underway. And obviously the city is making some use of the Hydro Ottawa surplus. We see a comprehensive term of reference for phase 2 of energy evolution, and we look forward to seeing that report soon. So there are some good things, and the city and some of its staff should really be applauded for making progress. We would like to use this opportunity, however, to draw attention to some areas of concern, which are some of the ones that have already been mentioned by other stakeholders and by councillors. The way we're thinking of it is we kind of break it into three buckets. We're concerned with clarity, transparency, and timeliness. On the clarity front, I think Angela from Cafes mentioned that there is some risk of confusion between the agendas of air quality and climate change management plan as well as energy evolution, a lack of conceptual clarity, and a risk that as we know, air quality and climate change management plan came out in the last term of council, and energy evolution in this one, that those two concepts will be conflated in future terms of council, and that we'd really like to make sure that there's some clarity there in terms of the distinct plans. Also under clarity, we're really looking forward to more frequency of reporting. There was a discussion earlier today. We're calling for annual community-wide reporting. And so, we do think the step towards a 2-year frequency that, Stephen Willis mentioned earlier today is a positive step forward. At the very least, it's better than what currently exists, which is every 4 years or longer. We're also, in terms of clarity, looking for, performance measures and breakdown by sector. And again, this is something that was discussed earlier today. The trick is to get it rolled out, quickly and efficiently. On the transparency front, I think that there's just a broad concern about the degree to which the public is aware of these things. The public is aware of the risk of us not meeting our timelines. And of course, the city has rolled out a stakeholder engagement and education process. We hope that is a strong one, and that there's more public-facing communications from the city that really highlight the urgency of this problem and what the city is doing to tackle it. Finally, in terms of timelines, we share the concerns echoed earlier today that it looks like we're slipping on a few fronts. The inventory update, as was discussed today, is due in 2018. We really would like to see it by fall of 2018. We're concerned that we're going to miss that deadline, as we've missed others in the past. And we're also concerned that when that comes out, it will be right in the middle of an election period or right after, and we'll get kind of skipped over. So we're concerned about the frequency of updates more generally, and whether or not we're staying on track. Finally, in addition, we're concerned with the energy evolution process itself. We understand that, it's been broken into 2 phases, and the next one is in 2019. But we would like to remind the committee that this is a delay from the previous stated target of having the clean energy strategy released by 2016. So we're falling back there. Finally, I would like to draw attention to the fact that, although it's good that 19 of 22 actions from energy evolution phase 1 have been or are underway. We're concerned that the other 3, these are actions slated for 2017, 2018. So we would like to urge, the city to initiate the 3 actions as well to make sure that we're as on track as possible. All of this is in the context of Energy Evolution Phase 1, which frames the action and portrays a variety of scenarios and states that only an aggressive scenario is the one that we must use in order to attain our climate reduction targets. And so the question is, from what we're seeing, is this on track with an aggressive scenario? And the is that increasingly it's not, especially because of the timelines concern. So, this points to broader questions. Are staff resources sufficient? Or is funding sufficient? How do we make sure that going forward we get back on track, that we retain, that we fall in line with timelines, and that we effectively deliver on a lot of the goals that are contained within the Energy Evolution Report? And finally, I guess the final point to add is that obviously this all takes on a different tone in the context of a new provincial administration. There's a broad question as to what we're going to do. Energy Evolution says that we need an aggressive scenario and points to other jurisdictions and the requirement that they also ramp up ambition. If we're seeing a lack of ambition from the provincial government, will we sustain or increase our ambition at the city level? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions from the delegation? No. Seeing none, thank you for coming. And yes, we certainly live with some unknowns at the moment with the direction from provincial government, but that is something we're going to have to do. Thank you. All right. I believe I had Stein Beckett next on our list, and then Daniel Buckles has signed up, who I currently have as the final speaker. Welcome, Diane. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. Just before I start my presentation, I just wanted to contribute a little bit to Mr. Brocklington's question. I think part of the issue is information, but I also think that when people are doing new things, that they need a little bit of assistance. And I understand that the province enables municipalities to access credit, and municipalities can access it at a lower cost. And this could be made available to homeowners and landlords for specific upgrades and capital. So that would be tied to the house and would go to the house and when it's sold. And I'd like to see the city be proactive in helping people to move forward. And I'm not sure if any city or municipality in Ontario is taking advantage of this legislation that the province has put forward, but I think it would be a really interesting way of moving things forward. So I was really interested in the phase 2 and the projects that are moving forward, and that's quite exciting to see. But I think in spite of these activities, I think that the city is not taking climate change seriously. It's dragged its feet for years, and it's put too few resources into addressing this important issue. And I'm concerned that that's going to continue unless the city takes some action to put things back on track and to up its game. The city, as we've all talked about today, has not produced an emissions report since 2012. So the city doesn't know if the emissions are going up, down, or sideways. The city says the emissions report should be done every 4 years, but it's not even meeting that minimal target. And I think this is an example that really highlights that it's not being taken seriously. If within one term of council, the council doesn't even understand what's happening, it can't really take serious action. Other jurisdictions report annually. And climate change was identified as a term of council priority, but if we can't even report and have a sense of where we are within our council, I don't think that shows that the council is very serious. I would mention that students in school are graded continuously by their teachers, and then that's reported 3 times a year to the parents. And I think an issue of climate change needs this sort of approach with a minimum of annual reporting of the information to the public, and not just that the public is supposed to hear that the reporting has been done. And the City of Ottawa is a member of the Global Compact of Members, and it hasn't even met its reporting requirements to this group. And this is where you're among your peers, and so the peers, you've worked years to come up with reporting requirements, and not being able to meet that, I think is quite shameful. And I'm also concerned that we don't have a plan to get to our emission targets. And in addition to that, there is outstanding deliverables because I don't think the city is committed to addressing climate change. So there's year-long delays on multiple climate files. There's a renewable energy strategy, an energy evolution strategy, an air quality and climate change management plan. These are all important things to have been done, but they've all been understaffed, under-resourced, and they're all behind on their deliverables. The energy evolution and the projects that are moving forward, they're building blocks and they're important, but they're not a plan, they're not a pathway. So we need this council to agree to annual reporting of emissions. We need firm targets that can be ratcheted up over time so we can meet our climate commitments, and I urge the city to take Councillor Leeper up on his proposal. And we need the climate adequately resourced and staffed. There's been way too much slippage on the climate file, and we've got to make sure that we're on track, we stay on track. This is a huge, important opportunity for the city to be a leader. It will create revenue, will create jobs. We could be a leader in the world and have it as part of our economic plan. And I just see that we're missing a huge opportunity to move forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Do we have any questions for the delegation? No. Seeing none, thank you for coming. And Daniel Buckles, please.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Mr. Chair. My question actually goes in a very different direction from comments from the public so far. It has to do with the energy conservation components of the energy transition strategy. And my concern that there seems to be an absence of any reference to green infrastructure as part of the strategy. It's very narrowly limited to hard infrastructure, buildings, etc. And the reason this is relevant is, to give you an example, a recent study from the City of Edmonton shows that the city receives $29 million in annual benefits, $29 million in annual benefits from 230,000 street trees in the city. That's a calculation based on the U.S. Department of Agriculture Forestry Services methodology for calculating energy conserved by reduced heating costs and reduced cooling costs. Trees have that benefit to residents and to the public at large of reducing those costs as well as reducing island effects well known in cities. So those types of that are present. And so my question really has to do with two parts. One is, why does the strategy not consider or has not considered landscape and trees as part of the energy transition strategy, the enormous benefits that can come from reducing energy costs? And why has it not considered the declining tree inventory in the context of the greenhouse gas emissions inventory as well?
Thank you very much. If that's the end of your presentation, do we have any questions for delegation? No, seeing none, you do raise some interesting questions, which we will make a point, I will at least, and others may want to make a point of asking our staff exactly where and if and where the green infrastructure, as some call it, and you've referred to it, of our natural spaces, etc. I'll make a point of asking that question to staff. Councillor Leeper, please now.
No, I'm wondering, because we are going to be chatting with staff about that one. In what form can you provide me some color around what that reporting would look like if it were included with the GHG progress?
I'm only going to be able to say very generally because I haven't thought about it enough to be technical about about how it might be reported. But certainly, you know, in any kind of basic economic analysis, one looks at what is not spent as well as what is spent. And so by saving energy for cooling and reduce cooling costs and reduce heating costs from an asset that the city owns, which are street trees and other trees and parks, etc., surely that savings can and should be considered as in context of trying to pursue its targets. And when you lose that asset, when that asset is degraded, that's a net loss. So the emissions inventory is obviously the things that are producing greenhouse gases, but it seems logical to me to see as part and parcel of that the loss of things that are preventing those emissions from going even higher by losing the green infrastructure in the city. That could be connected to the direct emissions inventory. A little bit vague, but this is for staff themselves to consider.
So I think the measures that we're talking about in the urban forest management plan are things like canopy cover and the inventory themselves, an assessment of their maturity, because we know that as the tree goes older, its GHG benefits increase exponentially. Those would be some of the measures that we'd be looking at putting in there as well.
Yes, and so connecting the urban forest management plan to the energy transition strategy more explicitly, I think would make for a more comprehensive and coherent approach to reducing energy costs and enhancing energy conservation, and the city can play an important role in that because of its large asset in the form of green infrastructure.
Would there be gaps? Are there gaps in the city's measurement of what we're proposing to measure on trees in the UFMP versus what would be required to measure if we wanted to understand the GHG implications of our urban? Are there measures that we're not going to do as part of FMP that would be valuable for understanding the greenhouse gas implications of our urban forest and how that's contributing to our overall reduction or decrease?
The one that I can think of off the top of my head is rate of loss of the green infrastructure. We'll have hopefully some overall assessment of baseline of the current inventory, but little information on the past and no clear. So the question is, to what extent can we measure the rate of loss of that infrastructure? And because through replacement as well, in its relationship to replacement, as trees are removed, we're not replacing that infrastructure at anywhere near the rate at which it's lost. So the relationship between replacement and loss is something that I think could help.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Buckles. That's helpful. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Seeing no other questions, thank you for coming, Mr. Buckles. That does bring us to the end of our public delegation, so we'll now move to questions for staff. We had just started down that list when I recalled I should have gone to delegations. I have Councillor Brockington and then Blais currently on the list. Please let me know if you wish to be added.
First of all, thank you for your report. I appreciate the update. And again, it was, in my opinion, sort of corporation focused. So I just wanted to ask a question that I asked the delegate when the Harper government was recently elected. One of the things it did to spur the economy and to address a number of issues in its older homes was to provide like a tax credit, a renovation tax credit, which proved to be very popular. And I think that could be one of the major ways to get people to invest the necessary funds to upgrade their homes. And that's just one example. Can you just remind me what type of outreach the city has done with our residents to focus on their own homes, their own businesses, their own properties? And I don't think this is the case, but has there been any formal political outreach with the government on requesting, encouraging them to consider those types of things, tax credits, education campaigns, anything to get people moving in that direction?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have not yet had those discussions. Bill and transportation, waste management, and building storage are part of the Phase 2 components of this plan. Now, we're aware of other cities that have done these LICs, these kind of grants to home work through tax solutions and such. Halifax, Toronto, you could number off different ways that other cities have done them. So, we will be looking through this Phase 2 as to what's going to work best for Ottawa, because we don't know yet what the best solutions are going to be. So I think once we get the modeling and the technical papers from our consultant, we'll have a very much clearer idea of what's possible, and then through our technical workshops go through the barriers, constraints, and how we can move some actions forward. And I think that's going to be one of the things we'll be looking at. So
just to confirm, this corporation's focus on GHG reduction is not solely focused on the corporation itself. Is that correct?
This energy evolution is a citywide plan. But I should note as well that energy evolution is a mitigation plan. The direction from council was to look at, energy conservation efficiencies and energy generation. Those are very much mitigation components. Though energy evolution is probably the primary tool I think we're going to be using to reduce our GHG emissions in the city, because there are so many component pieces, so many actions that can have that resultant effect of lowering emissions. We've seen how that's laid out in other plans, Toronto, Vancouver's, other cities. It is possible, and there is an adaptation component to climate change as well. To look at that as well, the trees, the carbon sink kind of component, and then when we do our renewal of the air quality climate change management plan, wrap that up into that final document as to how that plays out for the city itself.
So if I were to file an inquiry or even ask you offline, how municipalities can better work with provincial and federal governments as far as encouraging, like I said, those resident landlords to do retrofits, upgrades, would you be able to answer that, or do we need to wait until you've taken sort of all those variables into consideration?
We are doing that already with the energy component of it, with the phase 2. We are talking closer with the province and the federal governments in that regard. And we will take that again farther with our phase 2. We already know there's building code changes that are happening. Right. Net zero is coming by 2030. Step code is probably coming to where the building code increases every few years as a requirement. So those things are already happening, but...
Okay, I'll commit to meet with you over the summer. I do think this committee should consider, if we're meeting again in September, and if provincial and federal governments, are starting their budget cycles for next year, that we at least put something on the table. I do think there are some opportunities there where the provincial and federal governments can provide some sort of financial incentive far greater than what the city could do. And we don't have the financial capacity to do that. But all this to say, Mr. Chair, I want to work with staff and think about whether there's something that we can bring back to the table this autumn to reach out to the provincial and federal governments on other opportunities. And we'll just leave it at that.
I should put out, highlight that throughout the consultation process in developing the energy evolution strategy, provincial and federal partners were part of our working groups, our sounding board, and that there was an effort made to synchronize the work the city was doing, but also a recognition that the mandate on building code and mandatory efficiencies, etc., and funding for a lot of those are generally beyond the city's means, and that there were some quite substantial provincial programs at the time. That is, however, those unknowns that I already highlighted today, where we'll have to see where, if any or all of those are canceled, and then what else new might come out of a change in government, provincially in particularly. Yeah.
I'm just saying I endorse and fully support new building codes for new builds, but it's the older homes, and I'm not talking about 100-year-old homes. I'm talking about 40-year-old homes like mine and many others that are significant contributors to the problem. And if there was a way for families to afford the window upgrades, the new insulation, it's a contribution. And maybe they can't do that now, but with some rebate from their taxes, that would make it more lucrative. And when it came out through 10 years ago, it was very popular. So anyway, I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you. Next then I have Councillor Blais. No, okay, that was an earlier question. Councillor Shirelli.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So my question relates to the whole strategy and the electrification under item 1. And all of this is going just by switching the types and standards of whether it be vehicles or building infrastructure, things like that, it will have an impact on the results of the current procurement policy that we have. And I want to make sure that when this comes back, that we will have laid out in front of us the cost difference on procurement going forward, as opposed to just the use of energy. Because if you have equipment or vehicles that you have to dispose of 4 years earlier, or have to sink longer term money into, that has a long-term impact on us, and it can be really significant, because right after amalgamation we spent almost $40 million just rejigging our procurement policy on city vehicles, city fleet, and things like that. So something like this is going to have an impact on procurement, financing, and can you promise us that when this comes back to us next time, that there will be some description of that impact?
Certainly, through the chair, we can certainly look at that, and I would recommend not looking at procurement, also life cycle costs of these things, because generally EV type of things.
That's sort of the. Yeah. It is the life cycle difference that impacts the procurement, right?
Yeah, and it's known EVs, for instance, generally have less maintenance. Over the lifetime of an EV, you will pay much, much less than you would a regular gasoline-powered car, for example. So those are certainly, that is a consideration as well. So, but we can certainly look into that.
Very good, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor McKinney?
Thank you, Chair. I just wonder where we are with our progress on connecting to the federal government's district energy system in town.
Right. Our BEAM group is working with the federal government on that, a memorandum of understanding, and I think I understand we're pretty close on that, but talks are still going on, so I'm not sure where that's at exactly.
Okay. I can follow up then and find that out. I get asked that a lot, and maybe I'd like to put that out publicly. So, okay. Do you have a bit of a time frame for me?
I think the idea is to have it signed this year. That's what our deadline is on our work plan for this item. So,
okay. So it could be just late fall.
It could be, yes, by then.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Leeper, I believe if you had follow-up questions on the tree question.
I do fairly quickly, Chair. Mr. Buckles has challenged us to think about the energy savings associated with urban tree forest, the canopy, the benefits that those have. Is there room in our energy evolution strategy to think about things like to preserve our tree canopy in order to not have to produce energy in the first place because it has those conservation benefits?
It's a very relevant question, certainly, because trees do have, they act as a carbon sink, do cause GHG reductions. Through the energy evolution strategy, that's probably not the right place for it, but as I mentioned a little bit earlier, we are starting to look at adaptation and overall resilience for the city. And that would certainly be the place to address that kind of concern. And we are working on a canopy cover analysis right now. The staff in my group are doing this. So they're very aware of energy evolution and the whole GHG considerations. So those two plans, energy evolution and resilience, we really need to establish that within our air quality climate change management plan outcomes when we do the 5-year review for next year.
It would be interesting to see the difference in energy consumption. I have, say, 2 field houses in Kitchissippi of similar size. One is tree canopied in Champlain Park versus some that are just out there baking in the sun. It would be interesting to find out what the difference in cost of running those are and whether we can think about increasing the tree canopy as a way to achieve energy savings. So I would pick up his challenge to you and see whether we can think about that in an explicit way. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you.
All right, do we have any other any further questions for staff on this item then? If I might just make some closing remarks then on this. Yes, as many of our delegations have rightly pointed out, it has been a long and not always rapid progress towards resourcing and establishing our energy evolution plan and then finding funding for specific projects and initiatives. And I think we would like to be further forward than we are now, but we are making progress on this. It is clearly established as a priority for this city, and I'm pleased to see the projects now rolling out. We do, however, have to be very careful about fighting for more funding, to be blunt. This hydro dividend service may have felt like it dropped from the sky. It didn't really, and it isn't something that we can count on or should count on. That is a bigger and perhaps different debate than we can be having here at the Environment and Climate Protection Committee. But what it does mean is that we are going to have to, we in the future council are going to have to look to establish quite significant base funding in order to continue to make progress. Otherwise, it really will be these small and piecemeal, as some have said, projects. And the hydro dividend is not something that we should count on for that, as strategic as staff have tried to be in recommending how to spend that dividend. So I do want to thank staff for bringing us to this point, for community groups and individuals of all kinds who have continued to stay with the city even through the delays. There is a lot of work to do, very important work to do, but this is one next step in that process. I'm very much looking forward to the engagement with this consulting group. They have done good work from what I've seen in other cities. I hope that our people from all sectors in the city that need to be part of this energy evolution in capital letters and in small letters will return to the table. It can be discouraging when the work that you've done may not have turned into something concrete or not as quickly as you hoped it would. But with SSG and the work that's going to be done, it will be very important that we get all sectors out to those meetings and again giving us their best ideas and being part of this partnership. So I do encourage them to make that leap of faith with us one more time. On this item then, is this report received? Thank you. So moving on to item 2, Councillor Cluche, I believe you had questions on this, and one other councillor as well, I think. So please go ahead. There was no reason to have a presentation on this, but you have questions?
Thank you, Chair. First of all, thank you to staff, the commitment for our drinking water quality. The report is excellent. We do have the highest quality water, and residents of the city should be very proud of that. One of the items that is the level of nitrate in the Shadow Ridge communal well. What is the source of that? And it's going up, it's trending up. What is the source of that nitrate?
Mr. Chair, there's a number of reasons why there's nitrates in groundwater. It's not necessarily an uncommon occurrence. The Shadow Ridge source wells are actually in a shallower aquifer, and so it is much more subject to subsurface, over the surface influences, but things like septic tanks, agriculture activity. So there's a number of different sources that could be contributing to the nitrates. So this is why the city is embarking on a study to investigate the deeper source, which is the Nepean aquifer. And so we're doing some preliminary studies to confirm the quality of that water, and once that's confirmed, we will be proceeding to extending the wells to that better source water.
So it is surface activity, it's runoff?
It would be what is going on above the would be, and I mean, when you're looking at agriculture and fertilizer application, and you also have well septic systems, which are more underground as well, but it's closer to the surface is where you would get a tendency to, at the shallow aquifers, that you would tend to see some nitrates in source waters.
Is there a budget issue with respect to getting a deeper aquifer?
Mr. Chair, the budget has been identified, so there is current financial authority to proceed with the project.
Okay. And my last question is we haven't seen any increased nitrate in the other communal wells, have we? Carp or Vars or Munster?
Mr. Chair, those are non-detectable levels at all of our other communal well systems.
Is there any reason to expect that that will change? Is there any surrounding activity that will endanger those sources?
So we've been monitoring those source wells for 20, 25 years and consistently had excellent quality of those other aquifers. So at this point, to believe that there would be any significant change to that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cloutier. Councillor Leeper.
Thank you, Chair. I'm absolutely confident in the water that we have. You folks produce excellent water. I did see one red flag in the report, and I'd like to get a general sense of how our processes work. It was the Britannia B water mains. This was listed in the actions section, where in the 2017 large diameter water main examination, it was discovered that several of the water mains showed signs of I believe. A further examination was done, and 3 of them were determined to be in need of immediate repair, which have now undertaken, which is good. My question is, should we have caught that sooner? I don't like looking at a report and saying, particularly within infrastructure that is as critical as our water delivery, that something is looked at and it turns out needs immediate repairs that we were not aware of previously. On that repair, should we have caught it more quickly? Should we have had a better idea that these were going to need repairs? Should we have been more proactive on it?
So I'd like to introduce my colleague, Shelley McDonald. She's with Infrastructure Services. She's the manager of asset management and has overall responsibility of the large water main diameter program. So I'll turn the question over to Ms. McDonald.
Thank you, Ms. Rose. Mr. Chair, back in, if you a number of years ago, we had the Woodruff water main failure, and after that, we then have enacted the large diameter water main inspection program. So we are proactively going in and inspecting these lines in order to try to avoid a catastrophic failure. Pipes, like homes, like roads, deteriorate over time. And we do use a risk-based approach in order to identify those pipes that we should be going and assessing in advance in order to try to prevent a catastrophic failure. So I think by identifying these pipes and going through a planned repair is demonstrating that the process that we have identified is working, and we will be continuing to take these inspections, and where we need to, we will be undertaking those repairs.
Is there more information available on that particular one? Because the wording in the report, if I recall, and I'm sorry I don't have it in front of me, was along the lines of needed immediate repairs. And I'm just wondering, like, how soon did we catch that particular one? And we can take this offline. Obviously, this is very deep into one particular repair, but you know, was it an imminent catastrophic failure that we should have caught more quickly? Did we have a year to fix it? And perhaps in future, when these are being brought forward for council's consideration, a little bit more detail to help us understand the risk of imminent failure would be good to have.
So through the chair, the inspection technology that we're using continues to evolve. The distress that was noted was something that, if it were to be wire breaks, it would be something that we should be actioning. So it was the recommendation of the consultant that we should undertake the repair. Okay. And so we've done that. We haven't put that pipeline back in service. We have enough redundancy with the existing water mains that we have, thankfully, and work is now underway in order to secure that repair.
Okay. That was my question, Chair. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you then. Councillor Brockington.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the report today. It's certainly a good news story. We're blessed to have such a great source of water, the main source being the Ottawa River, and that the number of tests is above the provincial recommended the quality remains, as you say in the report, the best in the world. So I think we all have, I think, a responsibility to share the good news with our residents. Good. I like to travel, but I like to come home and enjoy Ottawa water. My one question is this. In your report, page 4, you talk about 2017 was the lowest year on record with only 148 water main breaks. Probably know where I'm going with my question. There's a micro neighborhood in River Ward that over a 2-month period, roughly 10, maybe it's 9, maybe it's 11, but let's say 10 water main breaks affecting more or less the same residents. It's very unique. What is the plan? And we've had discussions, but there's a need to get this on the public record. What is the plan for this particular neighborhood? And I don't know whether there are other neighborhoods that have similar issue, even though the number of total breaks are down. If there are other mini or micro communities or neighborhoods where you have the same ongoing issue with a number of water mains, maybe it was the same vintage, the same construction type, what's the plan in this case?
So thank you, Chair, for your question. You're right, Councillor, we have gone back and forth this winter. It was a particularly tough one for some of the residents in your ward. We follow a risk-based approach in order to prioritize the renewal strategy. And with the number of water main breaks on some of the streets in your ward, the plan is to evaluate the sewers in order to determine their condition and then determine then. So whether it would be an integrated project, would be the replacement of the road, water, and sewer, or whether or not it would be a water main only type project, which would involve replacing the water main and then a trench reinstatement and then following with resurfacing. So we are looking at that right now, and we will be reporting back into you as we move forward with defining the timeline for that work to be done.
Okay, I appreciate that. I fully support doing a full assessment, prioritizing other needs. Every repair costs money. When you have 10, we're now over $1 million potentially, and even though the neighborhood is about 65, 70 years old, and the lifespan of our water mains is longer than this neighborhood, we shouldn't expect to put the same people through multiple breaks every winter for a number of winters. And I think that's what I'm trying to reinforce, is that I completely accept the need to assess, like I said, factors, other variables, the cost of repairing versus the cost of replacement. But I just think in this particular case, it's very odd that within a very, very small geographic area, we've had the number of breaks that we have. And so if full replacement is an option, then certainly I would urge you to consider that. But if we can meet at some point to discuss what the plan is, I would accept that opportunity.
Through the chair, so just one clarification. The cost of a repair is anywhere from about $5,000 up to $15,000, and $15,000 would certainly be on the high end. So just wanted to provide that clarity. And certainly we will sit with you. We will reach out to your office in order to discuss the plan once the assessments on the sewer side have been completed and come back with the approach.
Seeing no other questions, then, thank you for coming, and I will just seize this opportunity because you cannot say it enough to remind our residents and visitors that we have extremely safe drinking water. It costs about 1/100th or less of buying it in a bottle, and you don't have to get a bottle, and it's probably the same water that they just sold you in the bottle anyway. Thank you. End of editorial. So moving now to the first of the two motions that we've brought onto the agenda. Yes, I was reminded that a formality, we needed to receive the previous report, Energy Evolution, we needed to receive it and approve item 2. Is that carried? Thank you. All right, and we need to receive the one we just have, so received, drinking water. Thank you. Item 3 was carried, so this takes us to the letter, as you will recall from the council meeting a mere week or so ago, that there were concerns raised about what the resource implications were for asking for this planning authority over landfills. I'm looking at the mayor's letter re landfills. You should have received by circulation the draft of the letter. I don't have paper copies with me, but they're all available on our drives. Do we have any questions or considerations of this? Is this item carried then? Okay. Carried. Great. So on to Councillor Brockington's motion. Mayor's letter re landfill awarding. Do I need to approve separately those two? There was mayor's letter re landfills and approval of wording. No, I guess one was just the putting it on the agenda. Sorry, me talking to myself. Those are approved. So Councillor Brockington, and I do want to thank a couple of members of the events industry and sector who have been here through a long but very interesting discussion of all sorts of issues. That may not be why you came out. We are now finally getting to you. Councillor Brockington, if you could move your motion or perhaps introduce your motion then, and then we can go to the delegations.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, or Mr. Chair. I'll be very brief here in the interest of time. Members will recall last month staff tabled a reply to an inquiry I posed last autumn with respect to recycling in city parks and within special events and festivals. And that led to a at that committee and a commitment that we would review this item before we broke for the summer. I've worked collaboratively with the chair over the last month. Yesterday we met with members of the Ottawa Festivals Network who are registered to speak to this item in a few minutes. Basically what this motion calls for is for a commencement of formal consultation between city staff and the festivals industry, which includes special events in excess of 500 participants. And the expectation or the goal, if possible, would be to implement the provision of recycling, on-site recycling and organic waste collection as of May 1st, 2019. The second component of this motion would be to look at for opportunities between various city departments and those special event hosts, if support's needed to be provided, to have that conversation as part of consultation and to see as part of the recommendation package coming back to this committee what supports, if any, the city could provide. And as worded, the motion says that this come back to April. You may hear some concerns today from the industry that we'll need to reflect on in this motion, but I wanted to table it as is, have a conversation with the delegates, and then decide if there are any tweaks that need to be made at that point. So, Mr. Chair, just a very brief introduction to that, and I look forward to discussion with members of the committee.
Thank you then. Do we have a formal list registered to this item? Yes, I do. Here I have it. So first, Carol Ann Pitchinen of the Ottawa Festival Network. Yes. Are you doing it together? All right. At the same time as Nick Ives Allison, Executive Director, Ottawa Music Industry Coalition. Please go ahead, whoever is speaking, and the mic's now.
Yep. So yes, my name is Carol Ann Pitchinen. I am the Executive Director of the Ottawa Festival Network. And for those of you who are not aware, OFN is a not-for-profit member service organization, and we support the festival, fair, and special event industry. We do that through research, advocacy, and education. And we work to support industry excellence and to work collaboratively with many different partners to support a vibrant, inspired, and prosperous festival city.
I'm Nicole Ives Allison, Executive Director of the Ottawa Music Industry Coalition. We very recently partnered with the City of Ottawa to develop the Ottawa Music Strategy, the most important goal of which is to champion the music industry and help use that to build the city's economic and social prosperity. OMIC and the Ottawa Festivals Network work closely on many initiatives that are of importance to our community. We work together to ensure our city's events are sustainable, safe, and green. We are pleased to have an opportunity to speak to you today and to have met yesterday with Councillors Chernushenko and Brockington to discuss the genesis of this motion, the desired consultation plan and process to support raising the bar towards improved recycling at our festivals and events.
So in many ways, the festival industry has led the way in greening practices. You might be familiar with some of these. So the precursor to City Folk, the Ottawa Folk Festival, washed attendee dishes. City Folk today uses compostable beer cups, suckers and garbage cans to keep cups out of landfill. Hope Volleyball has set up bike racks long before they were even commonplace, and the Tim Hortons Dragon Boat is actually at the forefront of environmental leadership. It's the first carbon neutral festival in North America, and in 2007 it initiated a full recycling program and became the first eco-logo certified festival in the world. So both OFN and OMIC welcome opportunities to do more to support recycling at events, as Nick said. We must, however, ensure that organizers and organizations that support them have the resources and the capacity to fully engage a thorough consultation process and to meet the implementation requirements. 2018 is an unprecedented year for consultation in the industry. There are at least 10 separate consultations that have been initiated or will be launched over the next 6 to 8 months. And one of those inquiries will be spearheaded by Event Central, Ottawa Festivals, to holistically examine the framework that exists to keep all events safe, accessible, and enjoyable, which includes minimum event requirements, and the way in which the city services support them. So waste management could be a part of this review. Opportunities to review how the industry can improve waste management and contribute to a greener city would be welcomed. We want to ensure that we are setting ourselves up for success, and this would mean not having a comprehensive study initiated during this already extraordinary period of industry consultation. And the Ottawa Festival Network and OMIC would be pleased to continue this work with Event Central and other city partners to this end.
However, we would not be amenable to May 1st, 2019 as a deadline for implementation, given that the full cost and availability of city support for greener festivals wouldn't be known until April under this proposal, and simply would not provide enough time for us to implement successfully as the event season hits its height in the month of June. So planning would be 6 to 8 months out from that, usually starting in the fall, so it would be ahead of the consultation process that would provide the results needed to be able to determine what an implementation schedule would be. Our aim would be to see consultation initiated in 2019 with implementation phases so that there's no surprise harm to the festival and events industry. To insist on a deadline that is simply not realistic or with targets for the industry would be forcing it into a state of non-compliance as a result of undue fiscal, regulatory, and administrative burdens that could threaten to shut the doors of over 50% of our outdoor special events and act as a disincentive to prospective event and festival organizers at the same time that we're trying to encourage more of such activity. Our desire is to continue to work collaboratively with Event Central and our other city and community partners towards reasonable, phased-in, actionable improvements that bring meaningful and sustainable change towards a greener industry and the city.
Thank you.
Thank you. Questions then? Councillor Moffat.
Thanks for coming. Just a quick question. I think you guys work with the Richmond Fair and probably some other things in rural Ottawa and throughout the city that I'm familiar with. But do you find that the city generally just keeps adding more and more regulation to how fairs and festivals and events through the city go on every single year, and every single year when you have to come forward with a new application, go through SEAT, that there's always something new almost every year that we've added that is an extra cost to a lot of these groups?
So as it pertains to the city, I guess sometimes it feels that way beyond city. So for example, we've seen a 600% increase in SOPs for events to sell alcohol at their event, right? So that has been a pressure on the industry. We're going to see the marijuana legislation come down in July, and we don't really fully understand the impacts or the opportunities to the industry. So yes, we have potential security issues that are coming up. Nick, you might want to speak a little bit more to that, but we're very
we're sensitive to other looming pressures for the industry. So yes, it's something that's always on our radar because profit margins for festivals and in the city, 99% of our members are not-for-profit. So, you know, their profit margins are very razor thin, and it's something that they have to manage on an ongoing basis, especially every year where their budget, they're zero-based budgets. So every year they're starting from scratch, and having you know, a runway to successfully implement a recycling plan, for example, for smaller festivals and events could take, you know, a couple of years before they can actually have the financial traction to deliver on results. And so that's why you know, we're appealing for a more phased-in approach to whatever outcomes might come of an eventual study.
Right, because I know, as you mentioned, a lot of the groups are already doing a lot of stuff on their own because they feel it's the right thing to do, rather than having the city force them to do it at a certain time and at their cost.
Correct, and you know, we spoke to both councillors, Chernishenko and Brown, yesterday about some of the, you know, not so kosher practices of volunteers bringing their own recycling bins in order to, you know, do the right thing and recycle and collect recyclables, and then actually, you know, implement them in their or put them in their own trash, their residential trash systems, which is not, you know, kosher, but it just shows that there's really strong goodwill on part of the community.
So maybe instead of forcing you to do stuff, we can help you achieve that better by providing more bins and actually...
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep. And that's one of the things we've talked about too.
I think one of the key issues with, as it's proposed, is that there isn't clarity around the type of city support that would be available before we're having to work towards an implementation deadline. So if we don't know if the city is able to provide additional bins or provide funding or provide some sort of a financial support to ensure that private waste collection is possible, or even that there's the capacity for private waste collection that includes organics and recyclables on weekends, which is when most festivals and special events run, how can we agree to an enforcement that would start on May 1st, 2019, less than a month after those results would be presented, right? It's just, it's not feasible.
No, and it's an election year, so the city's budget won't be approved until March of 2019. So there's no way that even throughout the process, the city will be able to tell you with any certainty that there's money in the 2019 budget to help with these things that we're trying to force you to do.
Yes.
Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Brockington?
My questions are actually for staff.
No. I'll wait. Okay, let's finish with delegations then. Councillor McKinney? Also to staff. All right. Well, mine aren't. They will be to staff as well. But I certainly hear you and heard you yesterday, and I'm familiar enough with the event industry, as you know, because I told you about it yesterday, and many may not. I consulted in this world of medium to major-sized events back as early as maybe 1994 or 1995. So on the one hand, it's certainly not true to say that nobody saw this coming, in the sense that as far back as the mid-90s it was becoming the thing to do to run a green event, and it's surprising at this far along that not everybody is already doing it. On the other hand, the fact is that some are not, and some are absolutely excellent and are models that others could learn from. So the place that we're trying to get to, I believe as a committee, I can't speak for all my colleagues, of course, is to try to shift all events to where they would normally do these things, but in a way that it is as little a burden as possible. In the end, we will often get the laggards who will have to be forced to do it when everybody else did it voluntarily or were helped to do it. And I think that the general sentiment will be require it if necessary, but only if necessary to require it. So what would you then, and I will ask staff this as well, what better timeline than, help me understand again or perhaps reiterate, given that some people hearing us today and perhaps tomorrow will think, really? they can't do something as simple as recycle when we've been going in that direction for 25 years. That can't look good on the industry to say, whoa, hey, this came way too fast. But on the other hand, you do have your financial and volunteer impediments. Is there a phased rollout that you could see happening, an initial voluntary period of sharing of information while the city is coming up with service, defining service availability and costing perhaps to access those services? Have you any further thought to that?
Sure. Well, I think what I can say is part of Ottawa Festival's mandate is to provide skill and training. So we do, I mean, that's something that we can start immediately. We do already within the network, so we would share information, best practices that pertains to recycling, et cetera. Just a very recent mini-survey that we've conducted with our membership, 95% of our members are saying that they already have some form of recycling in place. So, but that's only a small sample size of our membership, so we actually took the initiative and did a very simple survey to try to get a sense of where people might be at. So in terms of a timeline, I think knowing that we've got consultation very heavily underway right now, I think what we'd like to think about is starting in January of 2019, meeting and discussing what this process would look like. And depending on the depth and breadth of that consultation, we'd be hopeful to be able to identify some low-hanging fruit opportunities before the end of 2019. But of course, any result and implementation on that result, as Nick and I have talked about, is really dependent on the commitment from the city to work in partnership with us to help us identify resources for, to support the implementation of the results that we all need to see. That would come out of that implementation consultation study.
And resources, you're talking education, the physical bins, the collection services, possibly provided by the city, possibly provided by the private sector, maybe as part of a bulk buy, if you will.
Yep, it could also mean, providing some internal human resources support to our network in order to implement this study. We don't know how broadly it might go.
And there are extra considerations too around best practices with regard to safety and security at large-scale events. That affects the types of bins that can be used, the ways that waste can be collected, storage, those sorts of things that are also additional considerations and would need to be taken into consideration when talking about, a city industry partnership in terms of waste collection and recycling.
Yeah, those are, of course, factors, I guess, a little bit unknown at the moment in terms of the security, I guess, clear bags and clear bins and that sort of thing for security reasons, but also related provincially, assuming that the intention of the previous government carries forward, we may be in a place in a couple of years where essentially it's mandatory that no organic material can go into landfill any longer, for example, in which case, I guess it behooves us all to start thinking about how that might be implemented. So I guess I will stop there. That wasn't really a question, and I'll look to other to colleagues who may have questions, and then I'll similarly have questions for staff about the practicality of and results for consultation, for implementation, etc. Councillor Cloutier.
Thank you, Chair. And without prejudging the consultation process, I think we've seen at our events as councillors, corn roasts and such, how much volunteer, when we do have green bins or source separated efforts, the volunteer manpower that is required, you need a person at those bins to help people direct, because you end up getting a polluted stream of waste that becomes so you need a person right there at the bins to assist persons, people who are attending the event to deposit. So I get the point of the industry that we want to set this up for success, and we want it to be successful, and that will require additional volunteer manpower at the events. That's my comment, further to yours.
Any further questions to the delegations? Councillor Kakish?
With regards to the 90% that you spoke in terms of they already participate, is that mostly for bottles and cans? And are there any, as far as you're aware of, that already do organics as well?
That's a good question. Unfortunately, we didn't have the time to get into a lot of depth on that survey, so we don't know the answer to that.
Okay, thanks.
Any further questions to the delegations? Yeah, Councillor Lieber?
Sorry, just one quick, can you say again, what is the timeline that you feel would be appropriate to have this discussion?
Well, and I'm eager to hear Event Central's point of view on this as well, but I think that if we could start discussions about what are the needs and what are the priorities in early 2019, that would work with Ottawa Festival's work plan, and I think it would also piggyback nicely on some of the discussions that we're already going to have this year with Event Central about services in general for the industry.
I'll staff about those. So early 2019, we can begin talking to the industry. What would it look like if we were to implement a regulatory regime for recycling at festival? We take a bunch of the year to get your input, come up with a regulatory approach, implement it for May 2020.
Yeah, I think that, and I think a phased-in approach is going to be key because as we know, there are festivals that are doing a really great job. We know from this mini-survey that we've conducted that many of our festivals want to do better, but it's just a matter of how and what.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. Councillor Brockington?
I'm just confused on the need for a year of consultation. Basically, I envision staff a consultation that's, for those of you who are recycling and organics, how are you doing this? What are your costs? How do you make this successful? And those who aren't, what are the impediments that are leading you to make this decision? And so I don't see how we have a year-long consultation on the questions are going to be short and clear, and members of your network, whether those who are engaged in it or not, need to be, participate and give that feedback. I think it's misleading to state 95% of your members are recycling because that's not true. Be true of those who answered the survey, and people who are engaged are maybe more willing to admit that they are part of that solution. But I think it's fair to say, and we need to state here today, that 95% of special events and festivals are not. It could be 50%, but to suggest and to have the media report that only 5% are not, that's not an accurate statement. And the reason why I'm bringing this is because I attend dozens of festivals every summer, and there's a significant number who are not. Recyclables and organic matter are simply going in the garbage, and that is why this matter is here today.
Perhaps if you just want to clarify then, I believe you did say you admitted that your own sample size was quite small. It was a rapid survey, is that right?
Yep, absolutely, and I do want to stand corrected on that. So I did make an error, and it is 77%. And you're right, Councillor Chernyshenko, it is a very small sample size, but at least it gives us an indication that many festivals, I think it's fair to say that many festivals are recycling. Now, the nuances of that is not clear, and that's what we haven't been able to get into, and that's what this eventual consultation, I hope, would do.
And to add, with all due respect, the consultation process certainly wouldn't be expected to take a year of intensive consultation. It isn't, the consultation required for this wouldn't be something on the scale of the other 10 consultations that are ongoing. It would probably be hit somewhere midway. However, we still need that on-ramp, and there needs to be the time to take the results from the consultation to develop an implementation process that works. And then once the implementation process is clear, to then be able to onboard festivals so that you're having buy-in right away. We don't want to do this in a way that festivals are not going to be successful. We want to make sure that we're not just mediocre at recycling. We want to be a leader as the festival industry in Ottawa is nationally, right? We want to do it well. We want it to be something that the city can be proud of. We want it something to be that our industry can be proud of, and we want to serve as an example for other municipalities that are farther behind.
Indeed. We truly do want to raise the bar, and so I concur with my colleague Nick.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. Thank you for coming. You've certainly been heard, and we're going to have to take all these views into consideration as we try and find a way forward. I would like to now ask city staff who are in attendance if they could be available for questions, particularly from our Event Central and bylaw. And if you could just introduce yourselves, if not for councillors who may not know you, for other people in the audience.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Amanda Mullins. I'm the Program Manager of Event Central. And I'm Marilyn Chernow, Director of Solid Waste Services.
Well, I will lead off, and then we are likely to have questions from staff, currently, what services, if any, does the city make available to, is there something that they can contract with the city, or does that even exist?
Thank you, Chair. In terms of the planning process, and this doesn't speak to actual infrastructure or equipment, but in terms of the intake, event applicants are asked for a waste management plan, and then they're encouraged to access some of the resources available through the event guide, linking them to a toolkit essentially from the province. In terms of actual infrastructure, is recreation and culture facilities available? It was identified in the response last time where certain inventory for very small events is available. So essentially it's recycling bins.
Chair, if I may add to that. So from the solid waste services perspective, we do not service these special events. As Amanda was saying, that there are these racks that small events can use, but the large festivals would not be able to use those racks.
So really the events industry per se, and we have this definition of 500 visitors and above as sort of a cutoff for our bylaws, if I understand at the moment. That is something where they are treated as the IC&I sector, industrial, commercial, institutional. Even if it's individuals going out, it's an event, it's an activity. So although we may thank individual volunteers for their commitment, taking these things home and putting them out at the end of the driveway over a number of weeks, that is not, I suppose, normal.
You are correct. They're considered industrial, commercial, and institutional, and I guess in a smaller event it might be practical, like a community barbecue, to bring recyclables home. In a large festival, that would not be practical, I would suggest.
So where would an event organizer go to? One of the several waste services suppliers in the city?
Not a festival organizer, but there are numerous waste management companies that do offer recycling and green bin collection services to the private sector.
Could you see that being a viable service that the city would want to offer, or would we really just be duplicating something that the private sector already does well and knows how to do, and we might, as a city, provide a better service, for example, guidance manuals on how to set up your festival, how to, in purchasing, how to avoid certain types of non-recyclable waste in the first place. I'm trying to figure out where is there a niche for the city. I have no interest in directing the city to take on a whole new line of business if somebody else already does it well at a price that we couldn't match anyway or do better than.
So under the Municipal Act, municipalities are required to provide service, waste collection service to residents only, and that is only the mandate that we have accepted here in the City of Ottawa. Like I said, this service is provided by the private sector, and I mean, for us to get into that business would require staff, equipment, bins, resourcing that we currently don't have, and you know, I've never really looked at getting into that venue.
Mm-hmm. On the development of this requirement, it was certainly brought to our attention by one of the main organizers of the Ottawa Ukrainian Festival, who happens also to be a regulator with a lot of background in writing bylaws, and she reminded us that you can't require something if there's no bylaw. You can say you require it, but it's got no teeth, so it's really a waste of our time requiring something if there's no bylaw to enforce it, and bylaw staff to enforce it. What would your recommendations be for a process to make this mandatory? We could do several things. We could do something optional and encourage it while we're doing that work, for example, but for it actually to become a requirement, it would have to have that support. Is there a process that you might recommend?
Point of order. We are debating whether or not we go down a road of formal consultation, which will yield recommendations. You're asking for the recommendations now. Okay? You're asking staff to tell you how we're going to implement what the logistics are. I mean, that's not debating today. Today, it's what are the merits of going down a road of formal consultation, which will include a formal report with recommendations. So asking staff to give us their recommendations today not in order.
It is my interpretation as the chair, and when I'm done speaking, you can choose to challenge me as the chair. It is my interpretation that I'm trying to find a way that we move the event industry to all participate in recycling and composting, and that I'm trying to clarify what the best and most rapid way of doing that and having full compliance is. And so understanding what our staff resources are and what process they might recommend is. I don't believe I'm jumping the gun there, but if you wish to challenge that interpretation, I will leave that to you. Not seeing a challenge to my chair, I will continue then. Without prejudging the recommendation, how do you think how does the city make existing requirements for events mandatory? And do we?
Thank you, Chair. In terms of the existing processes and existing provisions available to us under the current authority, under the special event public and private property bylaw, there are circumstances above and beyond the minimal requirements that we request of all event organizers. So, for example, a site plan, an emergency plan. If there's circumstances that arise, whether through event monitoring, feedback that might come through your office or the corporate debriefing process, there's a mechanism in which we can require additional plans or specifications from a specific situation, so a specific event where the issue might be significant and warrant such.
All right, thank you. I will stop with my questions. There may be others here who have them, as Councillor Cloutier.
Thank you, Chair. Merci, Monsieur le Président. Councillor Brockington suggested this would be 2 or 3 questions to festivals. Does this consultation have any budgetary implications for the Special Events Department?
Chair, the Event Central in particular, we coordinate all of the city services and we bring their specific areas of expertise, legislative requirements to the table. So I couldn't speak to, depending on what those recommendations were in the role.
The consultations. So does the consultations have? Do you have the budget, the resources to effect this consultation with all the other work that you have at this time of year or in early 2019?
Thank you, Chair, for the clarification. So currently, as I understand it, there is a council-approved bylaw review work plan. If we were to proceed with the consultation and the timelines proposed, I understand that we would have to look at the prioritization of that work plan currently. Another option available to us is based on the fact that staff have initiated conversations with the festival network and intend to come propose the bylaw in its entirety being reviewed in the next term of council. That's another option available to us.
Are you able to talk about how that consultation might, what's the nature of that consultation that's suggested by the motion by Councillor Brockington? How would it roll out? What would you do? Do you meet? Do you send an email?
I think the consultation, especially, I think we've heard it has broad impacts, and we wouldn't want to take it lightly. We would want to reach out to many of the stakeholders that would impact potentially Ottawa Tourism, our community associations, BIAs who also often organize events, and that's something that we would want to hear in some of the discussions that we've had here today. What services are available to them in the community, what services could be made available to them through the city, what are the financial implications, and how do we work with them to develop timelines that are achievable.
Okay. If we're talking about, there might be several layers to the recommendations, comprehensive recommendations, and so I wonder about an implementation date of May 2019. But in simple terms, if a source, an organic source or recycling source, is corrupted, polluted, what happens to that stream? What ends up happening to it?
The markets are fairly stringent on the cleanliness of those waste streams, so recycling, it's in the news about, the requirements for very, very clean recyclables in order for them to be marketed. And the same goes with organics. So it would require some due diligence on the festival organizers to ensure that those waste streams were properly sorted and kept clean.
Not be looked at or reviewed by the department, it would be accepted or rejected.
Yeah, there would be the potential that that material would end up in the landfill if it was too heavily contaminated.
Okay. In terms of recommendations that the proposals talks about in April 2019, and again, without prejudging what those recommendations might be, implementation in the month following, is it realistic?
I think that the timelines are a challenge for city staff in the sense that, based on what we've heard, the event industry is in the prime of their season. The consultation probably wouldn't start till the fall or the winter. And the fact that their staff would be diverted from existing priorities, work plans, to come back with the recommendations and the report to council. If we don't know what those recommendations look like until April, to turn around an implementation that might have cost implications could be a challenge.
Thank you.
Councillor Brockington?
Thank you, Ms. Mullins, for coming. I will remind you that we worked on this motion together, including the dates that are in this motion. Given the testimony that the Festivals Network has provided, and I certainly do not want, my intent is not to negatively burden either the industry or any special event or festival. I'm sensitive and empathetic with some of their own pressures that they've provided here today. So I just want to share with you what I'm thinking, and I'm sharing this with the committee to think about. But if we left silent an implementation date, if the motion was amended to remove an actual date, we still direct you to go through the consultation. We still direct you to engage the other departments within the city. And we asked you to come back in June of 2019. So let's give you a year. You find out from the network and the other players the best time to do consultation. And just come back to us with your report and recommendations a year from now, and then the committee will decide the best way to move forward. Would be better for the festivals group, would give you and your team more time to do that consultation and flexibility, and whether it's staggered or all together, that would be part of your recommendation. So would you agree that that would be a better course to go at this point?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, that does leave a lot of opportunity in terms of staff consulting with the community. I do want to note that if the avenue we're pursuing is to formalize the requirement, that would have to be through an amendment to the bylaw. And as such, if we're working under those timelines, staff can report back before next week's council on the feasibility of the proposed motion, which also needs to take into consideration the reprioritization of that work plan.
So, Mr. Chair, what I'm going to propose is that this motion is broken into three parts. The first part, the words "with an expected implementation date of May 1st, 2019" be struck. So all other part of that recommendation would remain. We would just eliminate "with an expected implementation date of May 2019." That'd be eliminated. And then in part three, that the staff report come back to us not in April of 2019, but June. And so that's the amendment I'd like to make to my own motion.
I'll have to check if the original mover considers that a friendly amendment.
Yes. Yep.
Seeing yes, I see no difficulty at all with that. It sounds like it's a reasonable compromise that will get us to where we want to. It's your amendment, so you don't need support for others to amend your motion, but do we have any further questions then or clarification at this point? Yeah, Councillor Taylor was on the list. Certainly, I guess that is now the motion that we are looking at.
So thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And so I had a sense that that's where Councillor Brockington was going when he said, "Can I just go ahead and amend this or talk first?" It seems to me that I understand and I'm sensitive to the Festival Network and what they're saying. I also understand where Councillor Brockington's coming from, and that we want to land in a place, and I think, Chair, this is where you were going. How do we get the industry to a place where they're all participating in recycling, and of course they're going to have source stream implications on accessing goods to cut down on the required recycling. Is it not possible to simply split the baby here and say, can we not have voluntary implementation in 2019?
Yes, please.
And and mandatory implementation in 2020? I mean, I guess that'd be a question for the mover. The mover in amending his motion is kind of given up all the candy because he's taken out any implementation date. So all we have is a report coming back for information. So I'm wondering if there's, consideration worthy of saying, look, move
approve the implementation date, but it doesn't negate the opportunity of voluntarily having the sector or some parts or some festivals that could implement sooner, do so. Just briefly, that's implicit from day one. And I think there's a responsibility on the Festivals Network to continuously communicate with their members. This is 2018 and there are heightened expectations. But for this motion, I'm satisfied with how we've just amended it, and I would prefer that we commence this consultation. Then the industry knows what our expectations are. We are moving in this direction. And if folks can voluntarily go in that direction this year, fantastic. I'm satisfied with how it's been amended at this point.
Councillor Shreddy?
Okay, if we do this, how do we justify to festivals that they will be the only part of the IC&I sector that this will be expected of? That's a question.
That's a question, but to whom exactly? There's the mover.
The mover is moving it, so you know there are others that have a problem.
I'd be glad to jump into that and offer an answer. We did have this as part of our discussion.
I'm looking for just any answer. I'm looking for the answer.
Well, I will do my best to definitive answer to that question. As we discussed yesterday with the delegates who are here right now, no, there is no implication here that the festival and events sector is the only and the worst offender in terms of non-compliance with recycling or composting. What it is, a visible one, and a very visible one both to our residents and to tourists. And there is this sense that we have heard often enough that, oh really, in this day and age, can't we do better? And then the fact that there are some that are doing extremely well, highlights those that aren't. I think this is, we can't, there are, yeah, in the sense that the city does not have anything close to full governance over the IC&I sector, which is really what you're getting at. I guess because so much of what we do with tourism and events is part of a partnership. There's a very strong, city involvement in these events, and it does come down to the visibility. Is there a definitive answer to why this one sector and not the others? No, but then in the same way, we've created bylaws making it illegal to smoke, at events, for example, and may not have done that in other workplaces first. So there's a precedent for that sort of thing.
Okay, but the visibility, I think, just highlights the general problem in the IC&I sector. Because the reason this is visible is you have, say, 7,000 or 10,000 people gathering in one location. They would be creating the same amount of waste if they were dissipated into their various jobs during the day and that kind of thing, but nothing's expected of that.
No. Well, but if they were at home consuming the same things, there is an expectation from the city that they would be streaming these out. We're not getting 100% compliance there either, but are working on it. So. That was a long and non-definitive answer from me, but an attempt to do so. Well, yeah. So I think without definitive answers to questions like that, I think looks like we're approaching voting on this now. Councillor Moffat, yeah.
Just want to comment on this. Just follow up. I'm going to put my question to delegations. This, to me, regardless of the implementation date, I mean, obviously having a motion that doesn't presuppose the conclusion, but presupposes the implementation of we have no idea what it's going to be concluding, was a problem. So I appreciate you taking that out of there. But this is every special event, over 500 people. It seems that, and Ms. Mullins and I met about this not that long ago, it seems that every year we're asking more of our special events, more of our community organizations that provide these events. These events aren't, they became big because they were successful in communities like Dickinson Days in Manotick. I mean, the Osmond Festival, the Carp Fair. These are things that every single year we have seat meetings, and every single year there's something more. For Dickinson Days this year, it was lighted signs on the 10th that is only used during the daytime. That was something they had to add this year. It's an extra cost. Dickinson Days lost $1,000 this year. They would lose more if I didn't cover the cost of policing. That's probably not something I should be doing or should have to do. But the reality is that's another imposition on these festivals in the last several years, is that they now have to pay for their policing. We do the Santa Claus parade for free. So Christmas is fine, but everything else we charge. So I just see this going down that road. It's just another thing. We're asking these people and we're imposing something on them that we don't seem to really care about doing ourselves. What are we doing with multi-res organics collection? Anything? Have we talked about a committee at all this term? No? Not really. So we receive reports. We do nothing substantive in terms of addressing some of these things that we have issues within our own situation, the things that we can control. Yet we feel it's okay to go and impose on us things that we feel they should be doing. I have a big issue with that. And it seems, like I said, every year it's something new. And we can sit here and we can pontificate all we want about how they should be doing some things. But how about we figure out what we're doing first before we go tell them what to do, when we know that many of them are doing their best to do it anyways because they know it's right. So I won't support this. We'll see if it passes and it comes along. We'll see what comes out of it. I might not support that either. But bottom line is I'm not going to support this today, and I hope that the majority of this committee doesn't either. Thanks.
Any others to speak to this? I will leave the closing remarks to Councillor Brockington if he wishes. I would just like to say that yes, there is an element to that, Councillor Moffat. I certainly take that point. Yes, this committee has debated organics in multi-residential and is struggling to move towards that being mandatory, but has also recognized in that sector that where you have buildings that are already built and did not have the facilities to store, that is a challenge for them, and that's part of the reason we haven't acted too quickly on making it mandatory either. So I think this committee and council has tried to be sensitive to the realities of the kinds of expectations that we have for others as well as ourselves. In the end, this is all waste material that can either be put to a more productive use or will ultimately be landfilled, whether that's in a municipal landfill or a commercial one, typically within the city of Ottawa, and that to me is a problem. And where we can work with this sector and others in the future, I think that is a good thing and a positive direction. But I do see this as a partnership that we are entering into, and I think the amendments that have been made reflect that. So I will be supporting this amended motion. Councillor Brockington, do you wish to closing remarks? Nothing to ask. So we're at the point of asking the question before I am asked when are we finally going to have lunch. Is this carried? Do we want to go yeas and nays? All right, yeas and nays.
Councillor? Yes. Councillor Cloutier?
Yes.
Councillor Leeper? No. Councillor McKinney?
Yes.
Councillor Moffat?
No.
Councillor Karkish?
No.
Councillor Taylor?
Yes.
Councillor Shirelli?
No.
And Councillor Chernushenko?
Yes.
Carried 5-4.
5-4, carried. Thank you for this extensive and exhaustive debate. That does bring us to the end of the agenda in front of us. Let me go to the right procedure for closing up. We have no notices of motion that I'm aware of. No inquiries that I'm aware of, and no other business that I'm aware of. So I move adjournment. Next meeting is scheduled for the 18th of September 2018. Thank you.